Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was walking home from the grocery store around 11:20 on a Tuesday night. I live out on the edge of town in Ashwood, Oregon. Small place, lots of straight roads, fields that go on for miles once you get past the last block of houses. I had just finished unloading the bags into the fridge and realized I forgot something, so I grabbed my jacket and headed back out. It was cool for September, maybe mid-50s, clear sky, and the street was empty. I cut through the vacant lot behind my house instead of taking the sidewalk. I like that because it shaves off a couple minutes and at night it's usually quieter anyway. My phone was in my pocket playing a podcast at low volume, something about old unsolved mysteries, but I turned it off when I stepped into the lot because I like hearing the night sounds. Crickets, frogs in the ditch, distant cars once in a while. Normal quiet stuff. I was about halfway across when everything just stopped. 1 second, there was the usual buzzing of insects and the soft swish of the wind in the tall grass. The next, it was like someone hit a mute button. Nothing. No insects, no wind, no gravel crunch under my boots. Just silence so deep it felt like pressure on my ears. I stopped walking because it felt wrong, like the night had abruptly paused. I looked around and the darkness seemed heavier, thicker. That's when I saw it. A dim light far above me, high up over the field, maybe a couple hundred feet up. It wasn't bright like a spotlight or a flash. It was more like a pale glow, just hovering there at first. I thought it might be a plane's navigation light, but it didn't blink. It just stayed constant, steady, like a small star that had somehow drifted closer. I nudged my head a little left and right, trying to get a better look. It didn't change or flicker. It just drifted slowly, sideways like it was being carried by a wind I couldn't feel. The grass around me was still, the trees weren't moving, not even a whisper of breeze. The eerie thing was the silence. It felt like the world had gone quiet on purpose. My own breathing sounded loud in my ears. I realized I wasn't even hearing the blood flow through my veins for a moment. Just this uncanny stillness. I didn't dare step forward or back. I just watched that light drift maybe 30 degrees across the sky, slow and almost deliberate. Maybe 15 seconds passed before I noticed another odd detail. The temperature felt slightly different. Not colder or warmer exactly. More like the air went flat, like someone turned off the dynamics of the night itself. It was such a subtle thing that if you weren't paying attention, you'd never register it. But I felt it. That was what made my skin crawl a bit. Not fear, exactly, but this weird awareness that something wasn't behaving the way it should. Then, as quietly as the silence had come, it ended. The bugs started up again, crickets and grasshoppers and whatever else lives in that field. The wind rustled through the tall grass. Gravel crunched under my boots when I took a step toward the street. The dim light was gone, just cut off. The sky looked ordinary again, scattered stars in a wide arc. I glanced at my phone out of habit. Time read 11:42. That made no sense. I'd looked at it right before I turned my podcast off, and it had been 11:23 when I stepped into the vacant lot. That's 19 minutes. There was no way such a long block of time could have passed during those 15 or so seconds with the light, unless I had blanked out or miscounted. But I didn't feel like I'd been asleep or anything. I remembered every second of standing there in that silence, watching that glow drift. I walked back up the sidewalk toward my house slower than usual. I kept checking behind me out of instinct, like I expected something else to be there, but there was nothing. Just the quiet street with the normal night noise returning in full force. When I got inside, I left the porch light on and closed the blinds in the living room. I sat on the couch with a cup of tea and listened to the refrigerator hum, letting the ordinary humdrum of everyday life fill my ears. Later that night, I checked the security cameras I have pointed at the vacant lot. They record on motion triggers, and there was a clip from exactly 11:23. It showed me walking into the lot as expected. Then the next clip was at 11:42, showing me walking back onto the sidewalk. Nothing in between. No unusual lights, no movement. Just two regular clips with a big gap in the middle. I rewound the remote footage, watched hour by hour. No errors, no dropped frames, no indication that the camera had stopped recording. Just no motion detected in that chunk of time. I thought about the dim light and the silence and that weird feeling in the air a bunch that week. I even drove out there a few nights later around the same time, sat in my car with the headlights off, just staring at that patch of sky where I'd seen it drift across. Nothing. Just stars. Just night. Just the usual quiet. A few days after that, a neighbor mentioned seeing something odd in the sky around sunrise, just a brief flash of light, nothing more. I didn't tell her what I saw because it didn't really match. No flash, no bright beam, no daylight, just that slow drift and glow. I haven't walked that way at night since. I take the sidewalk now, even though it adds a few minutes to the walk home. And sometimes, when I'm out there before I turn onto my street, I glance up at the sky and look for that same kind of light movement. But I haven't seen anything like it again. And every time there's silence in the night or a weird softness in the air, I think about that moment, standing in the vacant lot with nothing but the sound of my own thoughts and a quiet glow drifting overhead, and the rest of the world frozen around me. I woke up around 3:10 a.m. that night without knowing why. No sound, no dream I remembered. I was just suddenly awake, lying on my back, eyes wide open. The room was completely still. No car passing outside, no creaks from the pipes, not even the refrigerator humming. I live alone in a small duplex in Helena, Montana. It's quiet here most nights, but this was a different kind of quiet. Heavier somehow. I reached for my phone on the nightstand to check the time, and that's when I saw the notification, a missed call from my own number. Time-stamped 2:46 a.m. I sat up in bed staring at it. That's not the kind of thing you see and just brush off. I've never spoofed my own number, never set up call forwarding or anything like that. I don't even have a landline. And the phone was in do not disturb mode. No vibrations, no ring, just a quiet little badge in my notifications. I opened the call log and sure enough, it was sitting right there. My number. One missed call, duration 0 seconds, no voicemail. I tapped on it, but there was nothing else. I stared at it for a minute, then swiped over to the health app out of curiosity. It said I'd taken 42 steps between 2:45 and 2:47. I didn't remember getting out of bed. I set the phone down and got up slowly. My room was dark, blinds closed, streetlight casting faint orange lines across the carpet. I walked to the door and stood there for a second, listening. Nothing. Then I pushed it open and stepped into the hallway. I always leave the hall light on at night, just a habit, but it was off. I was sure I'd flipped it on before going to bed. The floor was cold. I remember that specifically because I usually sleep in socks, but I wasn't wearing any. That struck me as odd. I checked the bathroom. Empty. Kitchen. Normal. Back door. Locked. But the little magnet sensor on the frame was blinking red. It blinks green when it's secure. I unlatched the deadbolt, opened it slightly, and peeked outside. Nothing. Just the yard, the fence, the gravel alley beyond it. No wind, no animals, no movement. I stood there for a while, letting the cold night air spill in, trying to think. I finally closed the door and latched it again. When I turned around, the hallway light was back on. That's when I felt the urge to check the photos on my phone. I don't know why. I hadn't taken any that day. But I opened the gallery, and there were 3 pictures at the very top, all time-stamped 2:47 a.m. They were completely black. No flash, no visible shapes, just pure darkness. I cranked up the brightness and squinted, trying to see if there was anything at all. Maybe a shadow or a faint outline. But there was nothing. I ran them through an editing app to adjust the contrast, highlights, exposure. Still nothing. That creeped me out more than if I'd seen something. It meant the camera had been opened, pointed at something, and shuttered 3 times in pitch black, while I had no memory of being awake. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat on the couch with the TV on low, watching reruns of a cooking show, just waiting for the sun to come up. Around 6, I went out front and walked the perimeter of the house, looking for anything out of place. The grass was undisturbed. No footprints, no debris. But I noticed something weird about my bedroom window. The screen was slightly askew. Not popped out, just nudged, like someone had gripped the corner and bent it just enough to peek inside. I checked it later in daylight and saw fresh scratches on the aluminum frame. They weren't there when I cleaned the windows the week before. The next night, I set up the old baby monitor my sister had given me years ago. Just a simple one with a motion sensor and audio. I pointed it at my bedroom door and left the camera feed running on a tablet next to my bed. That night, I didn't wake up. Not consciously, at least. But when I checked the monitor the next morning, it had recorded motion at 2:46 a.m. again. The video was just 15 seconds. It showed the door slightly ajar and nothing moving. But there was a soft, static hum on the audio. Not like interference, more like something mechanical, a low warble that faded in and out. And then the power cut out in the house for exactly 1 minute. I confirmed that by checking the stove clock. It had reset itself and was flashing 12:01. I pulled up the smart meter log from the power company's website and saw that it had registered a brief loss of signal, exactly 60 seconds long, starting at 2:46. That was when I stopped trying to rationalize it. I didn't call the police. What was I going to say? Hey, someone called me from my own number and left zero evidence of anything except for some creepy nothing videos and fake steps on my phone. No signs of entry, nothing stolen, no damage, just weirdness. A couple weeks went by without anything else happening. I thought maybe it was over. Then one morning, I found a note on the kitchen counter. It was just a piece of paper torn from my own notepad, the kind I keep by the fridge for grocery lists. 5 words, all in my handwriting. Don't go outside at 2:46. No date, no explanation, just that. The pen was still sitting next to it, uncapped. I always put the cap back on. I've had sleepwalking episodes once or twice in my life, but never like this. Never with my phone being used or my step count logging accurate movement or written messages I don't remember writing, and not coordinated with power losses and window tampering. I ended up installing motion-activated lights all around the house and syncing my phone camera to auto-record if anything moves between 2:40 and 3 a.m. So far, nothing's triggered them. But every night, right before I go to sleep, I make sure everything's locked up tight, and I put that note back on the counter, just in case. I'd just gotten into bed around 11:45, same time I usually do on weeknights. My apartment's on the second floor of this old duplex on Pine Hill Road, kind of tucked back from the street. Quiet neighborhood, mostly older folks and a few younger couples. I don't have blackout curtains or anything, just regular blinds, so when it's dark out I can still see a bit of sky through the slats from my bed. That night, I'd shut off the bedside lamp and was lying there on top of the covers, not asleep yet, just kind of spacing out. No TV, no phone, just listening to the fan hum in the corner. It was warm for October. Still and heavy, like the air wasn't moving much even with the windows open a crack. About 5 or 10 minutes in, I felt this vibration. It wasn't loud or sharp, more like a low thrum that passed through the mattress and the floor underneath. Not a rumble like thunder. It felt steady and weirdly mechanical, but very faint. I even thought maybe a truck was idling out on the road, but it didn't sound like that. It didn't build or fade. It just happened all at once for maybe 4 or 5 seconds, then stopped. I sat up, not scared exactly, just kind of confused. It was the kind of thing you second guess immediately, like, did that really happen or did I just imagine it? Then came the light. Through the blinds, everything outside turned this pale, bluish white for a moment. Not bright like lightning. It didn't flicker or flash. It was just a soft glow, like the way a TV lights up a room in the dark. It seemed to come from above, like the sky itself was lit up, but there weren't any defined beams or sources. The glow lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then it was gone. I got out of bed and went to the window, opened the blinds a little. The street looked normal. No headlights, no porch lights that hadn't been there before, no aircraft. The sky was just black again. Quiet. Not even the usual crickets or distant dog barking. That was the second thing that really sank in, how quiet it had gotten. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like you've gone deaf. I stood there for a good 5 minutes, just staring up. Nothing else happened. The next morning, I figured maybe there'd be something on the local news. Power surge, transformer problem, maybe someone messing around with floodlights. but I didn't see or hear anything about it. No neighbors mentioned it, not even the guy downstairs who usually has a comment about everything. That night, I went to bed around the same time. Honestly, I was half hoping it wouldn't happen again, but also kind of hoping it would, just so I could figure it out. I left the blinds slightly open this time. Nothing happened that night. But the next evening, something else did. It was around 10:30, a little earlier than the other night. I was brushing my teeth when I noticed the hallway light dim a bit. Not flicker, just a slow drop in brightness, like the voltage dipped for a second. Then it went back to normal. I checked my phone charger. It was still working. Nothing else in the apartment seemed off. I turned out the lights and went to bed, but kept the blinds open again. About 20 minutes in, I was still wide awake. That low vibration came back. Faint. It felt exactly the same as before, like something large and quiet passing nearby, except I couldn't hear anything. It was just the feeling. I rolled over and watched the ceiling, and that's when I noticed the shadows on it weren't still. They weren't moving wildly or anything, but they were shifting slightly, like something outside the window was affecting the ambient light. But there wasn't any light source out there. The glow happened again, softer this time, maybe shorter. I sat up and looked out the window. There was nothing in the yard, but the sky had a dull, uniform brightness to it, like someone had turned up the contrast just for a second. Then it faded, and everything looked completely normal again. Except now, the fan had stopped. I got up and walked over to it. It wasn't unplugged, and it wasn't broken. It just wasn't running. I toggled the switch, and it started right up again. No idea how long it had been off. I didn't sleep much that night. The third time was the worst. 3 nights later, by then, I'd told my friend Eric about it. He asked if I was stressed or overtired. I told him I wasn't, not any more than usual. That night I kept the window open a little wider. It was cooler outside, which helped. I sat up reading for a while and eventually dozed off. Around 2 a.m. I woke up suddenly, not from a sound, but just that sense that something's different. It wasn't the vibration this time, it was something else. The room felt, I don't know how to explain it, pressurized? The air was thicker, like in a plane cabin. My ears weren't popping or anything, but I had that sense that the atmosphere had shifted. I looked over at the window. The sky outside wasn't glowing exactly, but it wasn't dark either. It looked off color, a pale greenish gray like the inside of a cloud at dusk. No stars, no moon, and no wind. Everything was still. I remember feeling afraid to get out of bed. That sounds dumb, but it was like my body was reacting to something before my brain could catch up. My skin was cold, my hands were clammy, I felt watched, even though I knew no one was out there. Then a shape moved across the window. Not quickly, not close. It was like a darker area drifted slowly across the strange sky glow, like a blot of ink in water. There was no sound, no detail, just movement. It passed from right to left, behind the tree that stands at the edge of the property, and then it was gone. And the second it vanished, everything returned to normal. Stars came back into view. The temperature shifted, the air felt lighter. It was like someone had flipped a switch and the world snapped back into place. I got out of bed, walked to the window, and stood there until dawn. Nothing else happened. Since then, I haven't seen the glow again. The vibrations stopped. The fan's been running fine. I even bought a cheap outdoor security camera and aimed it at the yard. It hasn't caught anything out of the ordinary. But I still sleep with the blinds open. I still watch the sky when I can't sleep. And sometimes when everything's too quiet, I think I feel that hum start up again. So faint it's probably just in my head. Or maybe it never left. I was driving home from my shift at the plant, not even thinking about anything except getting a cup of coffee when I pulled up to the intersection at Route 45 and Cedar Road. It was cloudy, one of those gray evenings where the sun dips fast and you don't really notice until it's almost completely dark. I remember looking at the clock on the dashboard, 11:16 p.m. I'd left work at 11, so it had only been 16 minutes on the road. I was coming up over a little rise, headlights on low beam because I thought someone might be approaching in the opposite lane. There's no street lights out there, just open fields, some scattered trees, and that dead stretch of road that feels a mile longer than it actually is. That's when I saw it. The headlights caught something hovering maybe 10 feet above the asphalt. Dark, matte, and completely smooth, no edges, no lights, no shine. It wasn't reflecting the beams like a car or a sign would. It was just there, like a shadow holding its place over the road. I remember my first thought was maybe a piece of tarp caught on a branch and lifted by a gust, but the air was still, not a whisper of wind, and this didn't move. I blinked, just a normal blink, and when my eyes opened, it wasn't there. Not in the sky, not in the trees, nowhere. The road was empty ahead. The only things visible were the faded center lines, the shoulders, and the fields beyond, lit by my headlights. I glanced at the clock. It was 11:22 p.m. That made no sense. I just looked at it before the shape appeared, and it had read 11:16. There was no way 6 minutes had passed in that blink. There wasn't even time for me to take my foot off the accelerator or hit the brakes. I didn't know what to make of it, so I kept driving. My hands were gripping the wheel tight. The rest of the ride felt weirdly long, like time had stretched out after that moment. I remember watching the miles tick by like I was seeing them one by one instead of in a smooth blur. I pulled into my driveway around 11:35 p.m., gave myself a mental check to slow down, and cut the engine. I sat for a moment, hands still on the wheel, trying to convince myself it was a weird trick of light or something out of place on the road. But it didn't feel like that. There was something about how it just hung there, solid, silent, and completely unmoving. I got out of the car and walked up to the porch, and that's when I noticed the air was colder than it had been on the drive home. Just a sharp drop that made the hair on my arms prickle. I locked the car and headed inside, did the usual routine, turned on the hall light, tossed my keys in the bowl by the door, locked up behind me. Inside, everything was quiet but normal. The clock on the microwave read 11:37 p.m., which matched the truck clock after it had jumped 6 minutes earlier. My phone was on the counter, and when I checked the time there, it matched too. It felt like something had jerked the timeline forward without me noticing it happen. I made a cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table. I tried to remember every detail of those seconds on the road, what the shape looked like, what it felt like to see it. I'd driven that stretch of highway for years. I knew every pothole, every patch of cracked pavement, every tree on the shoulder. Nothing ever hovered over the road. Not even birds. About 30 minutes later, I got up and went to the living room to watch some late news reruns. About an hour after that, I checked the backyard camera footage just to see if anything odd had shown up while I was out. It's set to motion-activated recording, and there was a clip from 11:17 p.m. just after I left the intersection. The video shows me driving past the front yard, exactly how it should look. Then it cuts off and skips to 11:23 p.m. with me approaching the porch. No footage in between. No headlights passing, no wildlife, no swaying branches, nothing. Just that missing chunk of time. The next morning I drove that stretch again, daylight this time. I tried to picture the skyline where I'd seen that dark shape, but it looked like any other part of the road. Trees on both sides, empty fields. The sun was rising, fog hugging the ditch line in the low spots. I drove slowly, scanning for anything out of place. Barn roofs, telephone poles, deer trails, but nothing looked familiar in connection with what I'd seen the night before. I asked my coworker Carla if she'd ridden that road at night. She had, but she laughed and said the only weird thing she'd ever seen out there was an old farm light that flickered on and off when the wind hit the power lines, right? I told her about the shape I saw. She listened, nodded slowly, then said, "Maybe it was just your brain trying to make sense of shadows. You're tired after work, right?" I nodded, but it didn't feel like that at all. Later that day, I checked the truck dashboard clock again. It was still showing 11:22 p.m. for the departure time, which meant I'd left work at 11. I never turned that clock off or reset it. It had just jumped forward on its own. That night, I slept normally, though I woke up once around 3 a.m. and stared at the ceiling for a few minutes before going back to sleep. No sounds, no lights, just the usual quiet. For the next few days, I kept replaying that moment on Cedar Road in my head. I kept thinking about how odd it was that it didn't move or shine or reflect anything, yet it had a physical presence. And the missing time, the fact that both clocks had advanced without me doing anything, that was the part that made the whole thing feel like something I couldn't just shrug off. A couple nights later, I took a different route home, one that had more streetlights and passed through a few small neighborhoods. No shadows hanging in the sky, no jumps in time, just the normal blur of headlights and houses and stop signs. But every so often when I'm on that stretch of Highway 45 alone, even in daylight, I find myself glancing upward, like half expecting to see something out there waiting, steady and quiet, and then disappearing the second I blink. I don't know what it was. And I'm not saying it was anything specific. I'm just saying it happened, and I noticed. And no matter how many times I replay the memory in my head, there's this part of it that remains just out of reach, like something almost seen but never quite fully there. It was around 1:30 in the morning, early September, and I was camping solo just outside Pinedale, Wyoming, off one of those dirt roads that dead ends into trailheads. I'd pulled my truck off a little side spur, maybe a quarter mile from the main Forest Service road. Nothing official, just a flat patch where someone had clearly camped before, had a small fire ring and everything. I wasn't doing anything fancy, just needed to get out of town for a night. Brought a cooler, a chair, my tent, and a couple books. I'd left my phone in airplane mode to save battery and hadn't seen a single car since dinner. Weather was crisp but not cold, sky totally clear. I'd been reading with a headlamp in my tent for maybe an hour before I decided to call it. I turned the lamp off and lay there in my bag, just listening. Noticed how loud the insects were. All the usual summer forest stuff. Some distant owl, breeze moving through trees, tiny creaks and snaps. But overall, pretty peaceful. After maybe 20 minutes of just lying there trying to sleep, I caught it, a very faint light. Not in my tent, but through the wall. It was steady, pale, and coming from the direction of the woods maybe 100 yards out. At first I figured it was the moon, but I remembered there wasn't one that night. I'd checked earlier and it was that kind of intense, starry dark sky you only get when there's no moon at all. I sat up and unzipped the side of the tent. The light was still there, faint but visible through the trees. It didn't flicker like a fire or sway like a lantern. Just steady. White. Maybe the color of an old fluorescent bulb. Too pale to be a headlamp. I watched it for a minute, not sure if it was moving or if I was just blinking weird. The weirdest thing was how still everything had gotten. It was like all the bugs had stopped, no breeze either. Just a weird, too quiet air and that steady light. I didn't go toward it. I don't know why, but I just had this feeling like I shouldn't. Instead, I reached for my flashlight, stepped out of the tent slowly, and stood there with my hand on the zipper. I didn't turn the flashlight on right away, just wanted to see if my eyes would adjust. As soon as I stepped out, I realized something else. It wasn't casting any shadows, like I had a chair and a cooler maybe 10 feet in front of me. I should have seen a faint outline of something cast back toward me, but nothing. It was like the light was visible but not interacting with anything. That was the part that really freaked me out. I kept staring at it for maybe 30 seconds, trying to make out where it was coming from. No shape, no movement, just a sourceless glow out past the trees. Then in an instant, it went out. Not dimmed, just gone. When it disappeared, the air sort of pressed in. It was like the forest took a deep breath again. Crickets picked back up. Wind rustled somewhere behind me. Everything went back to normal, but I felt off. Not panicked exactly, just unsettled. I stood there for a while, flashlight still off, waiting to see if it would come back. It didn't. Eventually I got back in the tent and zipped it shut, but I didn't sleep. Every little sound outside made me freeze. I kept checking the fabric to see if light was coming through again. It wasn't. Around 4 a.m., I finally drifted off, but it was that light, shallow sleep where every sound snaps you halfway awake. I got up just after dawn, packed everything fast. Tent, cooler, didn't even bother with coffee. Drove back down the dirt road with my windows half down listening. On the way out, I stopped and walked a little into the woods where I thought the light had been. There was nothing there. No burned logs, no trampled grass, no gear, just pine needles and dirt. Not even a game trail. It wasn't a campfire, and it sure as hell wasn't a person walking with a light. I've hiked enough to know what those look like from a distance. This was different, too still, too clean. It didn't seem to touch the ground, just hung there, like a bubble of light someone forgot to turn off. I drove home with the radio off. Didn't really feel like music, just sat in the silence of the cab and tried to figure out what could have made a light like that. I still don't know. I was out in McKenzie County, North Dakota, early October, near where my cousin's property borders the edge of the national grasslands. Real flat, big sky. He'd invited me up for the weekend to help install a windbreak fence, and I'd taken Friday off work to drive out. It's not a place with much going on at night. Nearest neighbor's a couple miles, maybe more. So you either drink, watch firewood burn, or look at the stars. That Friday night was clear, colder than I expected, probably in the 40s. You could see the Milky Way without even trying. We'd finished dinner around 8:30, and my cousin Travis had gone inside to put his kids to bed. I wasn't tired, so I grabbed a blanket and set up a reclining camp chair behind the barn, away from the porch light. I had an app on my phone that could tell you what you were looking at, but I left it off. I liked not knowing exactly. I don't know how long I'd been out there before it happened. Maybe 45 minutes? I wasn't even fully paying attention, just scanning and relaxing, when I noticed one of the stars was moving. I've seen satellites before. I've also seen planes at high altitude with their lights barely visible. This wasn't either of those. For one, it wasn't bright like a plane. It was exactly the same as a star, tiny and steady, but it started sliding across the sky in a straight line, not arcing like the ISS or fading like a meteor. It moved maybe 10-15 degrees across the sky, heading west to east. Then it just stopped, abruptly. No slowing down, no flicker. It just halted mid-sky. I sat up in the chair and kept my eyes fixed on it, waiting for it to either resume or disappear. It didn't do either for a while. It just hovered, still looking like any other star, except now I couldn't ignore that it had moved. I reached for my phone, but stopped. I had this weird thought that I'd miss something if I looked away, even for a second. After maybe 30 seconds of being perfectly still, the star began to dim, not like something flying away or disappearing behind clouds, just a slow, steady fade out until it was gone. I sat there for a while longer. Didn't see anything else unusual, though I kept checking the same area it had disappeared from. No noise, no wind, just cold air and bugs buzzing somewhere far off. I told Travis about it the next morning. He shrugged and said maybe it was a drone, but we both knew that didn't track. Too high, too small, and absolutely silent. And who's flying drones out there at 10 p.m. miles from anything? I let it go. Kind of forgot about it, honestly. Then something else happened the next night. Saturday night, same deal. Travis and his wife had gone to bed. I was outside again, back in the chair. Different part of the sky this time, more toward the northeast. Around the same time, I spotted a faint movement, same kind of light, but this one was zigzagging. Just barely, but definitely not a straight line. It wasn't fast, but the direction kept shifting. Left, right, pause, up a little, then down. It didn't fade like the last one. It blinked out, just gone between 1 second and the next. And again, no noise. I stood up that time and walked toward the field a bit, just to get away from the barn. I felt this weird prickling on the back of my neck. Not fear exactly, but that thing where your body knows something's off before your brain does. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the sky for anything else. Everything looked normal again. When I turned back toward the barn, the yard light above the garage flicked off for about 2 seconds, then came back on. It's one of those dusk-to-dawn LEDs. I asked Travis about it the next morning, and he said it never does that. We even checked the photocell sensor. Nothing wrong. That day, Sunday, I packed up to head back home to Bismarck. It's about a 3-hour drive if you stick to the main highways, but I decided to take a longer route that cuts through the Theodore Roosevelt National Park area. Scenic route, you know? Somewhere between Fairfield and Grassy Butte, there's this pull-off with a view of the Little Missouri. I stopped to stretch my legs and eat the sandwich Travis's wife had packed me. I sat on the hood of my car and looked out over the hills. Just dirt, scrub brush, and that long, winding river. That's when I noticed the silence again. No wind, no birds, not even the occasional bug. Just this blanket of nothing. I looked up, almost expecting to see another light. Nothing. Then I noticed my phone screen had gone dark. Not off, just the screen black, even though it had been playing music. I pressed the power button and it came back on like normal, but the music app had closed itself out. As soon as I locked the phone and set it back down, the wind picked up again. A little gust, enough to shake the sagebrush and make my car creak a bit. Everything went back to normal. It was subtle. If the last 2 nights hadn't happened, I might not have even noticed. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping again. Didn't listen to anything. Just watched the road and kept checking the rearview mirror like something was going to follow me. That was 4 months ago. I haven't seen anything else since, but I don't stargaze like I used to. Not because I'm scared exactly, I just feel watched now sometimes. Like when I'm out walking the dog at night and I stop to tie my shoe, I get this sense that if I look up, I might see something just hanging there, waiting. And I don't know what I'd do if I did. I was driving down County Road 78 near Eaton, Colorado, late last September. That stretch cuts through mostly flat farmland, corn, alfalfa, sometimes cattle. It's not a busy road, especially after dark. I'd been in Fort Collins all day helping my sister move, and I left later than I meant to. The sun had set by the time I passed Greeley, and by the time I hit the 2-lane county roads, it was full dark. No radio, just engine hum and tire noise. It was one of those nights where you get into a rhythm behind the wheel. Not quite zoning out, but close. I first noticed something strange around 9:15. My clock had just rolled past that when I glanced off to the right. There was a fenced field maybe 100 yards off the road. It looked like there were cows out, but what caught my attention was how still everything was. I slowed down without even thinking about it. Rolled down my window. No wind, no bugs, and the cows, at least a dozen of them, were all facing the same direction, standing perfectly still, not grazing, not shifting weight, just frozen. At first I thought maybe there was something in the field with them, a coyote maybe, but I didn't see anything. That's when I saw the light. Not headlights. It was above the field, just hovering there, a faint white-blue glow, maybe the size of a basketball from where I was. No blinking, no beam. Just suspended maybe 20 feet off the ground, right over the cattle. I stopped the car, not slammed on the brakes or anything, but enough to come to a slow halt right on the edge of the road. The light didn't react, neither did the cows. I shut off my engine. The air went dead silent. I leaned halfway out my window. I couldn't hear anything. No buzzing, no hum. The light was just there, still. I sat there for maybe a full minute, trying to decide if I should get out. Something in me said no. Not fear exactly, just a deep discomfort, like I was seeing something I wasn't supposed to. I turned to grab my phone from the passenger seat, but before I could unlock it, I saw the light move. It didn't jerk or flash, it just lifted, straight up, smooth and slow without a sound. It kept going until it faded into the sky, not a fast fade, more like dimming itself out as it rose. The cows stayed frozen. After another 30 seconds or so, one of them shifted its legs, another flicked its ear. Within a minute, they were back to grazing like nothing had happened. I drove on. Didn't check my phone again until I hit the main highway. That would have been enough by itself, but it didn't stop there. About 15 minutes later, I passed another field. This one had horses. Same thing. Stillness. Every horse facing west, completely motionless. I didn't see a light that time, but I didn't stop either. I got home around 10:30. My dog didn't bark like he usually does, just looked at me from the hallway and walked back to the bedroom. When I passed the living room, the TV was on, blue input screen. I was sure I hadn't left it on. I went to bed without unpacking. The next day, I checked my dash cam out of curiosity. I'd forgotten it was recording. The footage was there, but at the exact time I slowed down by the first field, around 9:15, the video glitched. Not corrupted, just skipped. The timestamp went from 9:14:48 to 9:7:17:3 in one frame. No transition, just jumped. Sound cut out too. I checked the GPS track. It showed my car moving continuously, but my speed dropped to 3 miles per hour for those 2 missing minutes, then jumped back to 38 miles per hour. That was the only anomaly on the entire trip. I didn't tell anyone about it for a few weeks. Eventually, I mentioned it to my friend Eric, who raises goats out near Kersey. He just nodded and said something like, "Weird stuff out here sometimes." That was it. No follow-up questions, no joke. Just left it there. I've taken that road since then during the day and once again at night. Never saw anything like it again. But every time I pass that stretch of fence, I slow down a little. Not to stop, just enough to see if the animals are acting normal. So far they are. I woke up around 3:20 in the morning, not because of a sound or a nightmare, just wide awake like someone flipped a switch. I live alone in a single-story rental about 20 minutes outside Missoula, Montana, tucked near the tree line with a big gravel pull-off and a patchy backyard. It's quiet out here at night. No streetlights, barely any traffic unless you count deer. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It reminded me of when you get a nosebleed. That dry, sharp metallic tang, only lighter. I sat up in bed, sniffed, and figured maybe something was burning in the wiring. I reached over and flipped on the lamp, and everything looked normal. I checked the outlet near the bed. No heat, no scorch marks, nothing. I got up to check the rest of the house. The kitchen was dark, the thermostat was still set at 66, and none of the appliances were on. But that smell hadn't gone away. It wasn't strong enough to make me gag or anything. Just there, clinging to the air. I went back into my bedroom to open a window and noticed something else, the curtains. They were warm. Not like sun-warmed fabric, but noticeably warmer than the air. I touched the wall behind them. Cooler. The floor beneath them. Normal. Just the curtains. I pulled them back and the window glass was room temp too, but there was nothing out there. Just my yard, my shed, and the trees behind the fence. The moon wasn't up. It had been overcast when I went to bed, but now the sky was totally clear. Stars everywhere. Still air, not even a breeze. I stood there for a minute, trying to work it out. Then I noticed something else. The digital clock by my bed was blinking, like the power had gone out. That never happens here unless we get a storm, and the forecast had been clean. I checked my phone, 3:27 a.m., but the Wi-Fi icon was gone, and the battery, which had been around 70% when I went to bed, was already down to 19. I went to the kitchen to check the breaker panel, but everything looked fine. I turned the porch light on and stepped outside barefoot, thinking maybe something had hit the transformer on the pole near my property. But the night was dead quiet. Even the usual buzzing from the power line was gone. That's when I noticed the ground. It felt dry. Not just underfoot, the air too. Completely still, but in a weird way, like after a thunderclap when your ears don't quite pop. My hearing felt muffled, like my head was wrapped in a towel. I turned in a slow circle, trying to find any sign of movement. No wind, no sound, not even crickets. My motion light didn't flick on when I stepped further out, which was odd. It's pretty sensitive. Then the dog next door started barking. Not continuous barking, just one single bark, sharp and fast, like a warning. Then nothing. That dog never shuts up usually, so I waited to hear more, but it stayed silent. I backed up toward my front door and caught a glimpse of something up in the sky. I looked up fast, thinking it was a plane, but there were no flashing lights. Just a faint round shape. It was barely visible, not even really lit, more like a distortion, like when you see hot air rising off asphalt, only in the sky, and shaped like a soft-edged circle. It wasn't moving. Not fast, anyway, just hanging there. I stood completely still and squinted, trying to focus on it. My eyes kept drifting away from it, like my brain didn't want to process it. I blinked a few times, and for half a second, I thought it flickered. Like it got just a bit brighter and then dimmed again. The distortion pulsed faintly, then started to drift west, not in a straight line, more like floating sideways. No sound, no wind. The stars around it shimmered oddly as it passed over them. I watched it for maybe 2 minutes before I couldn't see it anymore. The weird part is, once it moved out of sight, the air shifted, like someone flipped the atmosphere back on. Crickets started up again, the air felt normal, and that muffled feeling in my head vanished. I stayed outside a bit longer, trying to make sense of it. I even walked back to the shed, just in case something had landed or left marks. But the grass was undisturbed. No smell, no heat. Just back to normal. Inside, the clock had reset itself. The Wi-Fi came back on around 4:10. My phone battery didn't drop any further, but it wouldn't charge properly until I rebooted it later that morning. The only lingering thing was the curtains. They cooled down eventually, but for the next few nights, they kept sticking to the window like there was static clinging to them. No reason. no weather change. They stopped doing that about a week later. I didn't talk to anyone about it for a while. I kept trying to find an explanation, transformer issues, air inversion, maybe a drone, but nothing I've seen or read fits exactly. I know what I saw, but at the same time, I feel like my brain keeps trying to talk me out of it, like I'm misremembering, even though I'm not. I haven't seen anything like it since. It happened 2 summers ago, sometime around mid-July. I was living in Elizabethtown, Kentucky. Not a big place, but not tiny either. I'd gotten off late from my shift at a local diner around 11:30 p.m. and decided to walk home since it was warm and clear out. I lived maybe a 25-minute walk away, mostly along quiet residential streets with those tall, old-fashioned street lamps that buzz if you stand too close. I didn't have headphones in or anything. I'd lost one of the earbuds that week and never bothered replacing them. So it was just me and my steps, a few passing cars in the distance, and the occasional cicada or dog barking somewhere behind a fence. I took the same route I always did. Up Sycamore, left on Hillview, then a long stretch down Laurel Lane. Laurel runs through an older neighborhood, lots of one-story ranch homes with big yards and chain-link fences. It's usually peaceful, and the streetlights are spaced just far enough apart that your shadow follows you in big looping stretches. I always kind of liked that part. I remember I was about halfway down Laurel when I first noticed something weird with the light. At first I thought one of the bulbs was flickering. It sort of dimmed, then glowed brighter for a second. But it wasn't coming from above. The glow was too soft, and it was slightly behind me. I turned around but didn't see anything. Just the empty street. No cars, no people. I kept walking, but I slowed down a little. My legs felt weird, not numb, but kind of echoey, if that makes sense. Like there was a delay between the step and when I actually felt it. A beat off. That's when I caught something out of the corner of my eye. My shadow wasn't syncing up with me. I stopped walking and it kept moving forward a step, like it was on a lag. Then it snapped back into place with this soft fluid ripple, like a sheet getting tugged back into alignment. I just stood there, staring at the sidewalk, trying to make sense of it. The light had changed again, not brighter or dimmer, just wrong. Too diffuse, no clear source, and there was no sound. The buzzing from the nearby transformer was gone, no bugs, no breeze, like the world was stuck on mute. I looked up and expected to see maybe a drone or something, but there was just this faint glow above me. Not a shape exactly. More like the stars were slightly faded in one patch of sky, a blurry smudge overhead, no outline, just a dim, circular area where the air looked thicker somehow. The light from it didn't cast shadows the way a street lamp would. It just existed. I backed up a few steps and my feet scuffed the sidewalk louder than they should have. The air still felt dead, but every sound I made was amplified. My breath, my clothes moving, the grit under my shoes. I whispered, "Hello?" without even thinking, and the sound bounced back too fast, like I was in a small room instead of outside. The glow faded after a few seconds, and I swear the stars in that patch of sky didn't come back right away. They blinked back in one by one, like someone was rebooting the night. Then everything came rushing back. The buzz of the transformer, a car passing a few streets over, a dog barking in the distance. It all slammed back into place. I looked down. My shadow was normal again, moving with me like it should. But I didn't keep walking. I just stood there, heart thudding, listening. My phone. 11:58 p.m. That wasn't right. I'd left the diner just before 11:30, and I should have been home by then. I wasn't that slow a walker, but nothing else on the phone looked off. No messages, no missed calls, just the time and a battery level that had dropped from 68% to 12%. I didn't want to stay there any longer, so I started walking fast. The rest of the street looked the same. Houses dark, windows shut, sprinklers on timers ticking faintly. But I kept glancing over my shoulder every few steps, feeling like someone was right behind me. A couple blocks from my apartment, I passed a little neighborhood park. There's a bench under a pine tree there, and I noticed something sitting on it. At first, I thought it was a person, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't shaped right. Not an animal either. It was just a black shape, like a coat slumped over, but not moving. I didn't stop walking. I didn't even look directly at it. I just kept moving, pretending I didn't see it. Once I got to my place, I slammed the door and locked it, then checked every window. Everything was still locked from the inside. I stood there in my kitchen for a long time, listening to the hum of the fridge and the clicking of the wall clock. The silence outside stretched too long. When I finally peeked out the front window, the street was empty, but the park bench was just barely visible in the distance. Empty now. That night, I didn't sleep well. Every time I started to drift off, I'd jerk awake, thinking I'd heard something just outside the window. I kept my bedroom light on, and every so often I'd check to make sure my shadow still moved when I did. It sounds stupid now, but I couldn't stop myself. The next morning, I walked back the way I came, looking for anything. Weird footprints, scorch marks, broken lights, but everything looked totally normal. No one else on the street mentioned anything unusual, and I never saw anything in the local paper about drones or outages or anything like that. I still walk home sometimes, but I don't take Laurel Lane anymore. I go 2 blocks out of my way now. It adds maybe 10 minutes to my walk, but I don't care. I haven't seen anything since. But sometimes when the power flickers, I find myself watching my shadow just to make sure it's still mine. It started around 1:30 in the morning. I'd been up late working on some edits for a small wedding shoot I'd done that weekend. Just me and a laptop in my home office. I live in a split-level house outside of Binghamton, New York. Not exactly rural, but right on the edge of some big open fields and woods that stretch for miles. At night, it gets quiet out here. Not country quiet, but close. A few houses scattered down the street, most with their lights off by 11. I remember because I'd just exported the final batch of photos and was shutting everything down when I heard it. This low, steady humming. At first, I thought it was something in the house, like maybe the fridge or the water heater kicking on, but it wasn't coming from any one direction. I walked into the living room, then the kitchen, and it was still there. Constant. No rhythm, no pulsing, just a flat hum. It wasn't until I stepped out onto the back deck that I realized it wasn't coming from the ground. It was overhead. The sky was clear that night, not a cloud in sight. You could see every star, even the faint ones near the horizon. But the moment I stepped outside, the humming got louder. Not painfully loud, just closer, dense. The kind of sound you feel in your teeth, like standing near power lines or under a giant engine that isn't quite running. I looked up, trying to spot a plane or something, but there was nothing, not even a blinking light. Just stars and silence, except for that hum. And then, just like someone flipped a switch, it stopped. Not faded. Stopped. And that's when the quiet hit me. I mean, real quiet. No crickets, no wind through the trees, no distant highway noise. Nothing. I turned slowly, scanning the yard, the field behind the fence, the tree line. My own footsteps on the wooden deck sounded sharp and unnatural. Every breath felt too loud. I stood there for maybe a full minute, waiting for something, anything, to break the silence. Then I saw it. Just above the treetops to the northeast, maybe 150 yards out, there was a light. A single, pale yellow orb, like a street lamp, but too high and with no pole or structure underneath. It hovered perfectly still. Didn't flicker, didn't sway, just there. I thought maybe someone had installed some new kind of light on the trail that ran along the back edge of the property, but it didn't make sense. There was no power out there. That trail was mostly used by deer and the occasional dog walker. No development had touched that land in decades. The weird thing was how it made the trees underneath it look. Not lit up, more like drained. Everything below it was washed out, like color had been pulled from the leaves and bark. My eyes started watering, like I was staring into something too bright, even though it didn't hurt. Then it started to move. Slowly, almost lazily, to the right. It drifted along the tree line at a walking pace. Not bobbing or weaving, totally steady. I should have gone back inside. I knew that, but I couldn't make my feet move. After a minute or two, the light passed behind one of the taller oaks and didn't come out the other side. It just never emerged, like it blinked out behind the trunk and didn't keep going. The silence remained for maybe another 30 seconds. Then, all at once, the night sounds came back. Bugs, wind, a distant dog barking, like someone hit unpause on the world. I exhaled and realized I'd been holding my breath. I went back inside, locked the sliding door, and stood in my kitchen for a while just listening. Everything sounded normal. Too normal. I went to bed but didn't fall asleep for hours. The next morning, I went out to where I thought the light had hovered, just past the fence line, near a cluster of maple and pine. The ground looked normal at first, but when I got closer, I noticed the leaves were different in a circular patch about 12 feet across. They were brittle and lighter in color, like they'd been left under a heat lamp. A few small branches were curled inward like they'd shriveled from the tips. There were no burn marks, no footprints. Nothing else unusual. I didn't touch anything. That night, I left the deck light on. I didn't go outside. Around the same time, a little after 1 a.m., the humming came back, just for a few seconds, then gone. Same thing the next night. Not as loud, not as long, maybe 5 seconds, then quiet. I stopped staying up late after that, set a strict bedtime, even left the TV on some nights. I didn't hear it again for a week. Then one night, I woke up around 3 a.m., no noise, just this strong feeling that something had changed. I went to the window and looked out at the backyard. There was a second patch now, almost the same size, maybe 20 feet from the first one. Same bleached, brittle leaves, same weird curl to the branches above, but I hadn't heard or seen anything that night, just woke up to find it. It happened one more time after that. Third patch, a little farther to the right, then nothing. I thought about getting trail cams, but something about the idea made my skin crawl. Like I wasn't supposed to document it. Like if I did, it'd escalate somehow. So I didn't. I still live here. It's been over a year now. The patches faded by fall, leaves grew in over them, grass came back. You can't tell anything ever happened if you don't know where to look. But I still do. Every time I mow the lawn, I drive a little slower over those spots, and sometimes late at night I mute the TV and just listen. I haven't heard the hum in months, but every once in a while I get this weird pressure in my ears, like I've just come up from underwater, and I wonder if it's starting again. I live in a cul-de-sac in Central Oregon. It's not out in the middle of nowhere, but we've got big yards, plenty of trees, and not a lot of streetlights. Our backyard backs up to a greenbelt that dips into a small ravine, then rises into some scrubby woods. Nothing fancy. Mostly deer, raccoons, the occasional fox. It happened in early October, late enough in the year that it got properly dark by 7. I remember that because my wife Dana and I had just finished dinner and were starting to wind down. She was watching a show in the living room. I'd gone out to the garage to dig through a bin of Halloween decorations. The whole night felt normal. I came back inside around 8:30, turned off the porch light, locked up. We both went to bed early. Maybe just after 10. The dogs didn't bark, no weird noises, just another night. It wasn't until the next morning that I noticed anything strange. I was making coffee, half awake, and decided to check the motion alerts from the security cameras. We'd installed a set of 3, one on the front door, one on the garage, and one out back, pointing over the lawn and into the woods. Normally it catches raccoons or squirrels, triggering the sensor. Sometimes neighborhood cats cutting through the yard. There was only one alert that night. 2:14 a.m. I tapped the video open, expecting to see a deer or something. Instead, the entire screen lit up white for maybe 2 full seconds. Not like a flashlight or porch light. The whole camera view, the lawn, the trees, even the side of the house was washed out. Just a flood of white light, no sound, no shadow movement, no figure. And after it faded, the yard looked totally still. Nothing stirred, not even the trees. I sat there and rewatched it probably 5 times. Then I went back and checked the other 2 cameras. Front door, nothing. Garage, nothing. Just the backyard camera. I thought maybe the lens had glitched, but when I checked the footage before and after, everything looked normal. A breeze rustling leaves at 2:11. A raccoon passing by at 2:22. Just that one burst, perfectly in the middle. Like something lit up the whole area for a few seconds, then vanished. I went outside to check, still holding my phone. The yard looked fine. Grass a little wet from dew. Trees still. I walked out toward the tree line, scanning for anything unusual. There's a slope down into the ravine about 20 feet past the fence, and I followed it halfway down. Nothing. No burnt branches, no footprints, no smell, no trash or lanterns or party crap from teens. Just forest. I didn't tell Dana right away. I didn't want to sound weird. But that night, when we were brushing our teeth, she mentioned something. "Did you get up last night?" she asked. spitting toothpaste. No, I said. Why? She paused. I thought I saw a light through the curtains, like a car pulling into the yard, but it was high up, bright. I just stared at her. You looked outside? She shook her head. No, I was half asleep. It faded before I sat up. So now I knew it wasn't just the camera. She'd seen it too. The next few nights, nothing happened, but I kept checking the camera every morning just in case. And then, 4 days later, there was a second alert. This one was shorter, barely over a second, but it was the same blinding white burst. Exactly at 2:17 a.m., this time I paused the frame at the brightest moment, trying to catch a shape or pattern in the light. But there was nothing, just pure white. The next morning, I walked the yard again. Still nothing. But that day, I decided to leave a rake propped against the back fence, just to see if it moved or fell. It didn't, but something else did. That night, after the second flash, I checked the recording and noticed something weird about the trees. Just before the light, the leaves on the right edge of the frame seemed to shimmer, like they were reflecting something. But there was no source. It was as if they were lit from underneath, even though the camera's infrared wasn't on. It wasn't enough to say for sure. Could have been wind. Could have been artifacting. I was starting to feel off. The backyard felt off, like it was too quiet after dark. I noticed I'd stopped opening the curtains on the sliding door at night. I didn't want to see out there. Dana never brought it up again. I think she forgot about it or convinced herself she'd imagined it, but I didn't, especially not after the third time. 1 week later, 2:13 a.m. White light again. Only this time there was a sound. Not on the video, not picked up by the camera mic. I heard it from our bedroom. It was a thrum, not loud, but deep, like the bass from a far-off concert, except it didn't vibrate anything. It just pressed inward somehow. A physical feeling more than a sound. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. I sat up in bed, fully awake, sweating. The dogs didn't move, neither did Dana. I slipped out from the covers and padded into the hallway. I could still feel it, not in my ears, but in my chest. By the time I got to the kitchen, it was gone. The light hadn't woken me. That came right after. I checked the live feed on my phone. The backyard looked normal again. Nothing there. I went outside. The air smelled faintly metallic. Not like blood, more like when you lick a battery, dry and sharp. I walked to the fence, then stepped over it. Went down into the ravine again, flashlight in hand. Still no footprints, still no damage, but it felt wrong. The air was too still. I had the stupid thought that I wasn't alone, not like someone was watching me, but like someone had just left. That feeling stayed with me all the way back to the house. The next day, I deleted the camera recordings. I didn't want them anymore. And that's it. Nothing since. No more lights, no more humming, no more flashes. But I still wake up around 2 a.m. almost every night. Not because of noise, not because of light. Just this weird pressure. Like I'm being drawn to the back door again. Like something wants me to look. And I don't. I keep my eyes closed, lay still, pretend I'm asleep. And in the morning, everything's normal. The yard is quiet. Too quiet. I was out on Lake Umbagog that night, early June, northern New Hampshire. I go every year, sometimes alone, sometimes with my brother or my buddy Ben. That year it was just me. I needed the quiet. I'd put in at the state park launch just before sunset and paddled out to one of the primitive campsites they keep up on the northeast shore, near where the river feeds in. Not many people out that evening. I saw one other boat coming in while I was going out. That was it. The weather had been iffy all day. Overcast, a little drizzle, the kind of calm that makes you think it might storm, but it never does. By 9 p.m., the clouds had mostly cleared out, but the air still felt heavy, humid and still. I set up camp, got a little fire going, and ate some leftover pasta I'd brought in a cooler. No bugs, weirdly. Usually they eat you alive that time of year, especially by the water. But that night, nothing. Didn't think much of it. Around 10:30, I grabbed my rod and a headlamp and walked down the little path to the lake. There's a short dock they maintain, maybe 15 feet out into the water, just enough to cast clean past the reeds. I fish quiet. No music, no talking. I'd brought a little flask, but I wasn't drinking heavy. I cast a few times, let the line sit. Mostly I was just enjoying the night, watching the sky open up. It was still cloudy overhead, but to the east you could see stars. The moon was about half low behind the trees. It was sometime after 11 when I noticed the glow. It started low in the water, maybe 15 or 20 feet out from the dock. Pale green blue, like the color of glow sticks, but softer. Dim. It wasn't a pool, more like a strip. Narrow. 2 feet wide, tops. At first I thought it was bioluminescence. I've seen that stuff in the ocean before, never in a freshwater lake, but hey, weird things happen. I reeled in and just stood watching it. The glow didn't stay still. It was moving, slowly, in a perfect straight line, not drifting with the wind or tide, just cutting across the surface, or under it more like, heading west, parallel to the shoreline. I turned off my headlamp and crouched down to get a better look. The glow passed maybe 10 feet out from the dock. No ripples, no movement in the water. Nothing broke the surface. Just that steady green-blue line, like something solid beneath the water, was lit up and passing by. It took about a minute to go from one side of my view to the other. Then it faded out. Not instantly, it dimmed as it moved away until it was gone completely. I waited, didn't move, didn't say anything. I felt something in that moment I've only felt a few times in my life. Not fear exactly, more like a quiet alertness. Like my body knew something was off and it was trying to stay invisible. After maybe 5 minutes, I stood up again, slowly, tried to listen. No wind, no frogs, no loons, no insects, nothing. I cast my line again just for something to do. Let it sit. 5 minutes. 10. Nothing happened. Then the glow came back, same color, same shape, but now it was coming from the opposite direction, heading east, back the way it came. It passed beneath the same stretch of water, just 10 feet out. Still no ripples, still no movement in the surface. But this time I felt something strange. Pressure in my chest, like standing near a subwoofer with the volume low. Not a sound, just a vibration I couldn't place. I backed off the dock. My tent was about 30 yards away, up a short incline. I didn't want to turn my headlamp on. I just stood there, staring at the water, heart thudding. As the glow moved off and faded again, I thought I saw something darker above it. A shadow on the surface. But the moon was out now, and it could have been the reflection of clouds. I don't know. I stayed out another hour, didn't fish, just sat at the edge of the dock, waiting. Nothing else happened. When I finally went back to the tent, I couldn't sleep. The night stayed silent, dead silent. In the morning, the lake looked totally normal. Ducks were back. I saw a turtle sunning on a rock. I even caught a smallmouth around 8 a.m. But when I walked back to the dock later that afternoon, just to stand there again, I noticed something I hadn't seen the night before. There was a line of stones along the lake bed, faint but visible through the clear water. Perfectly straight. No moss, no algae. Just clean, light-colored rock cutting in the same direction the glow had moved. I crouched down and reached in. Touched one. Warm, not hot, not even uncomfortable, but warmer than the water. Warmer than it should have been. I picked it up. It wasn't a normal rock. It was smooth, almost polished, like a river stone, but oval and lighter. Not white, more like bleached bone. There were faint lines across it, parallel, too even to be natural. I kept it. It's still in the glove box of my truck. I haven't told anyone. When I got home, I looked up bioluminescence in freshwater. Found some algae stuff, but nothing that moves in a line like that. Nothing that feels like a hum in your chest. I've gone back to Umbagog twice since, once the next summer, once last fall. Same spot, same dock, nothing happened either time. But that stretch of shoreline, still no moss on those rocks. Still smooth, still warm. I was driving east on Route 36 through West Virginia, somewhere between Spencer and Ripley. It was late, just past 1 a.m., early spring, still a bite in the air. I'd been at my cousin's wedding in Charleston and stayed way too long afterward, drinking coffee and catching up. By the time I got on the road, I figured I'd be home by 3 if I didn't stop. That stretch of 36 is hilly, mostly wooded, and doesn't get much traffic even during the day. At night, it's pitch black between towns. No shoulder, no streetlights, barely any signage. I know the route well, though, so I wasn't worried. I had my music on low and a gas station sandwich sitting on the passenger seat, mostly untouched. Around 1:20, I started to feel weird. Not tired, just off. Like the pressure in the car changed. Ears didn't pop or anything, but the silence felt heavier somehow. Even with the music playing, I noticed how quiet everything else was. No insects or frogs outside, and I had the window cracked a bit. I was coming around a long, shallow curve when the radio went out. just cut straight to static. Not fuzzy static either, more like a constant hiss, clean and flat. Then it changed. A single tone came through, steady, mid-pitched, no waver, no rhythm, just this dull, even hum. I thought maybe it was interference from a cell tower or something nearby. Figured it'd pass, but it didn't. The tone stayed. I reached out to switch stations, and as I did, I noticed the trees along the road were casting light in the wrong direction. I looked up through the windshield and saw it, a dull white glow pacing the car from above. It wasn't a beam, it didn't light up the whole road. It was more like an ambient wash, moving with me, keeping perfect speed. No shape to it that I could see. It just hovered, following. I slowed down, dropped from 55 to maybe 35, and it matched. Still directly above. The tone on the radio changed slightly, not higher or lower, but thicker, if that makes sense. It started to feel like it was coming from inside my head as much as the speakers. Not loud, just present. I pulled over near a gravel pull-off by an old pasture fence, killed the engine, and turned off the lights. The moment I did, the glow dimmed. Not vanished, just softened like a dying bulb. The radio tone kept going. I sat there for maybe a full minute, not moving, not scared exactly, but very aware, like I was being watched, like something was waiting. I stepped out of the car. The glow didn't move. It stayed overhead, maybe 100 feet up, diffused through the clouds. No sound from outside, no wind, no animals. The tone still hummed from the radio through the open door. I walked a few feet from the car onto the grass, looked straight up, nothing there. No shape, no outline, just the dull light, motionless. And then, click. The tone stopped. The silence that followed felt thick. I didn't realize how much that sound had been filling my brain until it was gone. I turned to go back to the car, and that's when the dome light inside flickered. Just once. Then it stayed off. The glow above dimmed in sync, like someone turning down a dimmer switch slowly, carefully. After maybe 10 seconds, it was gone. No fade. Just gone. Black sky again. I stood there for a while, listening. I turned the key halfway in the ignition. The radio came back on. Normal station, mid-song like nothing happened. I started the engine and got back on the road. Didn't touch the dial, didn't say a word. 15 minutes later, I passed a sign for Sandyville. I remember because I glanced at the clock and saw it was 2:38. That stretch from where I pulled over to Sandyville shouldn't have taken that long. I wasn't stopped more than 5 minutes, 10 at most. But the time was off. Back home, I checked the clock in the house. Same as my phone. My car clock was ahead by 15 minutes. It's never done that before or since. I didn't mention it to anyone for weeks. When I finally did, I left out the radio part. I just said I saw something weird in the sky. The next time I drove that road at night, maybe 2 months later, I passed that same stretch. Nothing happened. No glow. No sound. But when I looked down at the radio, the signal cut for just a second. Just long enough for me to hear a faint, familiar hum. Then it came back. Same station, same song. I didn't touch the dial. I woke up at 3:14 a.m. exactly. I know because I looked at my phone as soon as I sat up, or tried to. My heart was already pounding, and I couldn't figure out why at first. I didn't remember a dream or any noise, but I had this overwhelming feeling that someone had been right next to the bed, like they'd just stepped back when I opened my eyes. I don't usually scare easy. I've lived alone for 6 years. Got used to the creaks, the hums, the occasional raccoon knocking over the trash can outside. This was different. This felt personal, like someone had been watching me for a while. My room was dim. I don't have blackout curtains or anything, so a little light from the apartment complex parking lot comes through the blinds. I sat completely still for a few seconds, trying to listen. No footsteps. No sound at all. I glanced toward the door. It was still closed, same as I left it. No wind, no AC kicking on, no hum from the fridge down the hall, just silence. That's when I noticed my phone was on. Screen lit, camera open. It was resting on my chest, angled straight up at the ceiling fan. I didn't fall asleep like that. I never sleep with it on me. I usually leave it on the nightstand, plugged in. I picked it up and closed the camera app. My hands were shaking a little. It wasn't just that it was on. The camera had been recording. A video was saved. I didn't open it right away. I just sat there, staring at the thumbnail, a grainy, dark frame of the ceiling fan, unmoving. Eventually, I tapped it. The clip was 1 minute and 42 seconds long. It started in silence, just the ceiling. I thought maybe I'd rolled onto the phone somehow and opened it by accident, but I always locked the screen before bed. About 10 seconds in, there was a low rustling sound. Not from the phone, but in the room. It was faint, like fabric moving slowly, the kind of sound you hear when someone stands from a chair and adjusts their coat. I couldn't see anything on the screen, but the mic picked it up clearly. Then there was a second sound, sharper, like something small tapping lightly against the wood floor. 3 short taps, pause, then 2 more. I felt frozen watching it, trying to see any hint of movement in the video, but the whole time, it just stayed fixed on the ceiling. The fan blades didn't move, no shifting shadows, no shapes. Around the 1 minute mark, the phone itself tilted slightly. Not much, maybe just a few degrees to the left. Enough that the corner of the screen caught a sliver of my face near the edge of the frame. My eyes were still closed. Then the video ended. I sat there for a long time. I didn't play it again. I got out of bed and checked the apartment. Bathroom, living room, kitchen. Nothing out of place. Door still locked. Chain still on. When I got back to the bedroom, I noticed something else. My bedroom window was unlocked. That made no sense. I never opened that window. It faces the alley, and the lock is one of those little latches you have to physically slide with your thumb. It doesn't just come undone. I locked it the day I moved in and haven't touched it since. But that night, it was fully unlatched, just sitting there. No sign it had been opened otherwise. Screen still in place, glass untouched. I locked it again, checked it twice. Over the next few nights, nothing happened. But I couldn't sleep well. I kept waking up randomly, always around 3 a.m., sometimes exactly 3:14 again. I stopped leaving the phone on the nightstand, started putting it in a drawer across the room. Still, I'd sometimes wake to find it lying next to me again. Camera open, aimed at the ceiling. I checked the app settings, turned off every shortcut I could find, disabled voice activation, updated the phone, wiped cache, even factory reset once. Still happened. One morning, about a week after the first incident, I found a new photo in my gallery. It wasn't a video this time, just one image. Black and gray, mostly noise, like it was taken in a dark room. But in the lower left corner, there was a blur, something vertical, faintly reflective, like a sleeve or a narrow shoulder turned halfway toward the camera. I zoomed in as far as I could, but the image broke up quickly. I deleted it. After that, I started sleeping with a cheap motion sensor on the door. Nothing ever triggered it, no alerts. But every few days, my phone would still move on its own. I'd go to sleep with it in one spot and find it moved. On the bed, on the floor, under my pillow. Always camera open. I eventually bought a used flip phone and started using that at night. Left the smartphone in a drawer with the battery out. That seemed to stop it. But sometimes, usually when I'm half asleep or just drifting off, I get this faint feeling like something's just left the room, like I missed it by a few seconds. And once in a while, I'll wake up at 3:14, sure that I'm being watched. And the old phone, even with the battery out, will be warm to the touch. Image: I was driving back from my sister's place in Bluefield, heading east on Route 20, cutting through that stretch near Pipestem where the road winds along the ridgeline. It was around 11:30 at night, early October, and the fog had rolled in fast after sunset. The kind of thick, damp fog that clings to the trees and headlights don't do much good in. I'd been taking it slow, maybe 35 tops, just trying to stay in my lane and not end up in a ditch. There was no one else on the road. No traffic, no porch lights from houses, just fog and darkness. I had the windows cracked a little for air, and the silence outside was total. No crickets, no wind, just the low hum of the engine. Right as I passed a pull-off spot, I think it's technically a scenic overlook, but you couldn't see a thing, I caught movement above the tree line. Off to my left, on the opposite side of the valley, were 3 soft white lights drifting slowly above the trees. At first I thought it might be a plane banking low, but they were way too steady, and there was no blinking, no red or green. They moved together in a straight line, not fast, not jerky. Just a smooth, slow glide parallel to the ridge. I pulled over, not all the way off the road, just enough to get my wheels out of the lane. I rolled the window all the way down and leaned toward the passenger side, trying to get a better view. The lights were maybe 200 yards away, but high up, maybe 50 feet above the treetops. Not illuminating anything, not making the fog glow, just quietly sliding along. Then they stopped. Dead still. Hung there, completely motionless. Then the fog thickened again. Not gradually, it was like someone poured smoke across the road. In a matter of seconds, I couldn't see more than 10 feet out the window. And when it cleared, no lights. They didn't rise, didn't streak away, just gone. No sound, no movement, nothing. I sat there for a good minute or two, waiting to see if they'd reappear. Nothing did. I started driving again, slower than before. I felt weird, like I shouldn't have stopped. Not panicked, exactly, just watched. About 2 miles later, I realized something strange. My dashboard clock read 12:07. That stretch doesn't take half an hour. It had felt like maybe 5 minutes passed since I saw the lights. 10, tops. I hadn't turned off the engine, hadn't checked my phone. I hadn't done anything but sit there for maybe a minute or two, but 30 minutes had gone by. I thought maybe the clock was off, but my phone said the same thing. I even double-checked against the clock on the radio when I got home. Everything matched. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed another odd thing. My car radio had reset. All the presets were gone, like the battery had been disconnected. Clock stayed correct, but the rest was wiped. My check engine light was on too for the first time since I bought the car. That night, after I went to bed, I had this strange vibration in my ears. Not a sound, exactly. Just pressure. Like being on a plane that never levels out. It lasted for a few days. The next morning, I checked local news and social media, just looking to see if anyone else had seen something weird. Drones, aircraft testing, anything. Nothing came up. I drove that same stretch again a few days later during the daytime. I tried to find that exact pull-off, and I think I did. But standing there in daylight, everything felt smaller than I remembered. Trees weren't as tall as they'd seemed that night. The slope across the valley looked farther away. But that same stillness was there, the same quiet. I haven't seen the lights again. Not there, not anywhere. But sometimes when fog rolls in, especially if I'm driving alone, I'll catch myself looking toward the trees again, waiting, half expecting them to come back. They haven't, but I still don't know what it was I saw, or why I felt like something was watching me from above that night. It started on a cold night in late February, around 1 a.m. in northern Idaho. I lived just outside a little place called Troy. I'd gone out back to let the dog out one last time, and ended up just standing there watching the sky. It was one of those brutally clear nights, like the kind that makes the air feel thinner, crisper. Everything around me was quiet except for the occasional crack of frozen branches. My dog, Sadie, wandered toward the tree line while I stood by the edge of the yard, hands jammed in my hoodie pocket, watching Orion hang over the ridge. We don't get much light pollution out here, so the stars looked sharp, like someone had pinpricked the sky with needles. That's when I noticed the patch. At first, I thought it was a cloud, just a faint, uneven smudge near the western edge of the sky. But it wasn't hazy. It was just empty. No stars at all in that one section. Not dimmed, not twinkling behind cloud cover, just black. A perfect oval, maybe the size of my hand if I held it out. I blinked, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks, but it was still there, and it moved. Slow. Barely perceptible at first, like it was drifting with the stars. But then I noticed the nearby constellations staying fixed while that dark spot slid east, crossing just beneath Cassiopeia. My first dumb thought was that it was a flock of birds flying in formation, blocking the starlight. But birds don't fly at 1 a.m. in February. Not here. Not in total silence. I called out for Sadie, and she came running right back to me from the trees without hesitation. She's usually stubborn at night, always needs a few calls, but this time, she bolted straight to my side and didn't sit down or sniff around. She just stood pressed against my leg, looking in the same direction I was. The patch stopped. It hovered maybe 20 or 30 degrees above the horizon. Just a clean, oval hole in the sky. No noise, no flicker, no outline. Nothing. It didn't blot out the sky in the way a solid object might. It just wasn't there. The stars behind it were gone. Then it started to dissolve, not fade, but fragment, like the edges were bleeding back into the night sky. One moment it was a solid oval, and the next it was gone. Not slowly shrinking, not flying away, just gone. That's when I realized how cold I was. My hoodie felt damp. The hair on Sadie's back was standing straight up. I don't remember walking back to the house. One second I was in the yard, staring at the sky, and the next I was locking the door behind us. I hadn't noticed how long I'd been out there until I saw the microwave clock. It was 2:14. I'd gone outside just before 1, over an hour. It didn't feel like more than 15 minutes had passed. I wasn't tired, just confused. Like when you wake up from a nap and aren't sure what day it is. I checked my phone next. Screen was on the home screen, nothing open, no notifications. But the battery had dropped almost 40% since I'd gone out, and I hadn't touched it. I went to bed around 3, but I didn't sleep. I just laid there listening to every creak and pop of the house, like I was expecting something else to happen. Nothing did. Sadie stayed curled right at the foot of the bed the whole night, which she never does. She's a crate sleeper. The next day, I mentioned it to my neighbor, Neil, who's a retired Forest Service guy. Told him I saw something strange in the sky. He just nodded, didn't say much. But a few hours later, he showed up at my place with a pair of old binoculars and told me to keep them on hand. That was it. A week later, I was outside again, earlier this time, around 9:30, and noticed a weird noise. Not loud, but steady, like wind over a bottle. I scanned the sky, didn't see anything unusual. But when I went inside, I found the front porch light bulb had burned out. Not shattered or flickering, just dead. It was a new bulb. I changed it, and the next night it was burned out again. That happened 3 nights in a row. Eventually, I left the light off altogether. Nothing else has happened since. Not exactly. But I don't go outside at night unless I have to, and when I do, I always look up. That spot in the sky where the stars vanished sometimes still draws my eye. I don't know if it's the same place or if I'm just imagining it now, but I'll stand there staring at a totally normal patch of stars, waiting for something to move. So far, it hasn't. I was up at the Black Ridge Lookout off Route 217, just outside of Grants Pass. It's one of those pull-off spots people usually hit around sunset. Not too many folks go there after dark unless they're camping or looking to get into trouble. I wasn't doing either. I just needed to clear my head. I'd driven up from Medford after an argument with my brother, hoping some quiet would do me good. It was around 10:30 p.m. when I got there. Mid-August, clear sky, cool breeze, perfect visibility. You could see the lights of the valley below, scattered like a broken string of Christmas lights. No moon, just stars. I parked my old Subaru facing west, turned off the engine, cracked the windows, and just sat for a while. No music, no phone, just me in the dark. About 20 minutes in, I felt something odd. The car shuddered. Not a jolt, more like a ripple, like a low-frequency vibration passed through it. My first thought was a mild tremor. I'd felt those before growing up in Oregon, but it didn't feel like the ground moved. It was just the car. Windows didn't rattle, and the trees around me didn't sway. I stepped out, thinking maybe the engine had shifted weirdly as it cooled, but everything was silent. No wind, no animals, just stillness, the kind that presses on your ears. Then I saw it. A glow, dim and bluish, like the afterburn of a dying sparkler, moved slowly along the ridge opposite me. It wasn't coming from below like headlights. It was up, above the tree line, following the contour of the hills. I couldn't make out a shape. Just that glow. It didn't cast shadows, and it didn't flicker. It slid, smooth, steady. It faded as it reached the far end of the ridge. Gone within 10 seconds. I stayed out there, standing by my car, watching the spot it disappeared. I didn't move for maybe 5 minutes. Then the wind came back. Just like that, a breeze picked up again, carrying the smell of dry pine. I got back in the car, didn't start it right away. My phone was sitting on the passenger seat, face down. When I flipped it, it said 10:42. That didn't make sense. I'd only been out of the car for what felt like a couple of minutes. 5, maybe 6. I checked my watch. Same time. I had that weird sensation you get after waking up from a dream you didn't remember, like something had happened, but you couldn't grab it. I started the engine and flipped on my headlights. They lit up the trees in front of me, just normal. I shifted into reverse, but before I pulled out, I glanced in the rear view and saw something reflective low to the ground, near the tree line. At first, I thought it was an animal's eyes, maybe a raccoon or a deer, but it didn't move, didn't blink. just 2 points of dull reflection, low and wide apart. I turned in my seat and aimed a flashlight out the back window high, but when the beam hit the trees, there was nothing there. No movement, no reflection, just trunks and underbrush. I pulled out onto the road a little quicker than I meant to. The gravel popped under my tires, and my high beams caught a flicker of motion up the hill to my left. Too fast for a person, too fluid for a deer. Just a smear of something pale between the trees. The drive down was quiet. No cars coming the other way. Just the occasional turn in the road back, the kind where your headlights catch glimpses of things that aren't always there when you pass. About halfway down, the radio clicked on by itself. It was already tuned to static, like it had lost the station. Just white noise, but low and crackling. I turned it off. A second later, it clicked back on. Same static. I turned it off again, harder this time, and held the knob down until I felt the click of the power fully disengaging. It stayed off after that. When I got home, around 11:25, according to the oven clock, I opened the door and just stood in the front hallway for a second. I didn't feel scared, exactly. Just unsteady, like I hadn't driven there so much as drifted. I checked my phone again. The call log showed no activity, but the GPS history had me parked at Black Ridge for 48 minutes. I swear I wasn't there that long. Maybe 25, max. But the GPS said I arrived at 10:05 and left at 10:53. That mismatch stuck with me more than anything. Later that night, maybe around 2 a.m., I got up to use the bathroom. On the way back to bed, I noticed something odd with the hallway window. The curtain was pulled back just slightly, not wide, just enough that the edge of the window frame showed. I never leave it like that. I'm a pretty private person. I reached to close it and saw what looked like a faint smudge on the outside of the glass. Not like a fingerprint, more like a shape had been close enough to fog the window slightly, like breath. I opened the front door, checked the porch. It was empty. No sound, no wind. Even the insects were quiet. The next morning, I tried talking to my brother about it. I mentioned the weird vibration, the light, the time jump. He just shrugged and said, maybe I dozed off. I didn't push it. Honestly, I didn't want to say too much out loud. Saying it made it feel less real, but also somehow more threatening. For the next few nights, I kept my windows closed and locked. I didn't go out late, and every so often I'd catch that pressure again, like a low hum in the floorboards or a subtle shift in the air, as if something huge had moved somewhere nearby without a sound. But it never got clearer. Never repeated in the same way. That's all I've got. I woke up to the sound of the wind chimes on my balcony, the soft kind of clinking they make when a breeze pushes through. It took me a second to register it because my apartment in Flagstaff never got much wind at night, especially not in early September when the air sat still and warm. I waited for another gust, ready to fall back asleep, but the chimes kept moving even though nothing else did. No shifting trees, no rattling blinds, nothing. Then the sound cut off all at once, like someone grabbed the chimes with their hand. The silence that followed felt strange, heavier than the usual quiet of my street. I sat up, listening. No cars in the distance, no neighbor's TV bleeding through the wall, even the hum from the old fridge felt muted. It was like the whole apartment complex had taken a breath and held it. I checked my phone, 2:17 a.m. I swung my legs off the bed and walked to the sliding door. The blinds were closed, but a faint light pressed through the gaps. Not bright, not any color I could name. More like the glow from a computer screen through a curtain. I pushed one slat down with my finger and looked outside. The balcony was empty. The chimes hung still. The light didn't seem to come from anywhere specific. It just existed around the space. Not a beam, not a reflection. Just a soft haze sitting in the air, and the longer I stared, the more I realized it wasn't lighting the balcony so much as tinting it. I opened the door an inch to listen. The air outside felt warm and thick, like the moment before a monsoon storm, but the sky was totally clear. The neighborhood below, a small row of apartment buildings and a few storage units, looked normal, except the shadows seemed slightly off. Not stretched, not moved, just shaped wrong. I stepped out far enough to touch the chimes. They were still swaying lightly, even though I didn't feel any wind. When I grabbed them, the motion stopped, but the light didn't change. It stayed fixed, almost patient. I went back inside and closed the door. I remember thinking maybe there was a new construction light somewhere down the street, something the city had installed without notice. But the light didn't behave like any normal source. It didn't flicker, it didn't brighten or dim. It had no direction. I tried to shake it off and went to the kitchen for water. When I flicked the switch, the lights took a full second to come on. Not a normal slow start, more like something delayed them. Same with the faucet. The water sputtered at first, then came out normally. All these tiny things I would have brushed off during the day felt huge and out of place at that hour. As I lifted the glass to sip, the chimes sounded again. One soft clink. Then silence. I froze with the glass halfway up. I knew I hadn't opened the balcony door again, so nothing should have moved them. I didn't hear footsteps or voices or animals, just that single tap of metal hitting metal in a dead still night. I walked back to the sliding door and pushed the blinds aside, fully this time. The light was gone. The balcony looked like it always did. Cheap concrete, a folding chair, a potted cactus I kept forgetting to water. The streetlights below flickered the way they usually did. Everything seemed normal, except the quiet still felt wrong, like the world hadn't fully restarted after something paused it. I checked the sky. No glow, no plane, no clouds. I locked the door and went back to bed, but every time I closed my eyes, I felt like someone was standing just outside on the balcony. Not watching, but waiting. It was a pressure I couldn't explain. I rolled over to face the wall and tried to ignore it. At some point, I drifted off. When I woke again, it was 3:41 a.m. and the room felt colder than it should have. Not freezing, just wrong for early September. I sat up, rubbing my arms. The apartment heater hadn't turned on, so the temperature drop made no sense. Then I noticed a faint glow under the bedroom door. Not the overhead light, not the hallway bulb. This glow was low, close to the floor, and it pulsed very slowly, like something breathing. I stepped toward it and pressed my ear to the door. I didn't hear anything. No footsteps, no movement, just that thick silence again, like sound itself couldn't get in. I opened the door. The hallway was empty. The glow came from the living room window, which faced the parking lot. It wasn't the same color as before. This one was more gray than blue, but still not a shade I'd seen lights make. It filled the room without bouncing off anything. The shadows didn't shift or stretch. They just sat there. Against my better judgment, I walked toward the window. I felt drawn in a weird way, not pulled but nudged. When I got close enough to see outside, the glow vanished, leaving the room dark except for the faint orange street lamps. I scanned the lot. A few cars, a couple empty spaces, the dumpster at the far end. Nothing moved. Then I noticed something odd. The car alarms. Every car had its little red dashboard light blinking in sync. Not fast, not slow, just perfectly together, like someone timed them all to match. I watched for maybe 10 seconds before the lights all froze mid-blink. Every single one. Then they resumed blinking, but out of sync again, like normal. I stepped back from the window so quickly I hit the counter behind me. My heart was pounding. I didn't know what any of it meant, but I didn't want to witness the next thing, whatever it was. I sat on the couch with every light on, scrolling through my phone even though I wasn't reading anything. The silence pressed in again, heavier this time. I kept listening for any sound that proved the world was still moving. A passing car, a humming AC unit, anything. Eventually around 4:20 I heard something. A soft scraping on the balcony. Slow. Uneven, like someone dragging a foot or brushing their hand along the concrete. I walked to the sliding door, staying to the side so I wouldn't be visible if someone was out there. The scraping stopped. I waited, holding my breath. Then the chimes tapped once. Just once. I didn't open the door. I didn't look. I backed away and sat against the far wall until the first hint of sunrise. The second the light outside turned from black to gray, the pressure in the apartment lifted. The silence broke. I heard a bird, a car door, someone's shower turning on next door. It felt like everything snapped back into place. When I finally stepped onto the balcony, the chimes hung perfectly still. The cactus was untouched. The concrete looked normal except for one thing, a small patch near the railing that felt slightly warmer than the rest, like someone had been standing there. No footprints, no marks, just warmth on a cool morning. I stayed out there for a minute, listening for anything out of place. The world sounded loud again. Traffic, birds, people leaving for work. All normal. I went inside, took a long shower, and tried to tell myself I'd imagined most of it. But even now, months later, the wind chimes sometimes ring in that same gentle pattern, always at night, always when the air is completely still. And every time it happens, that heavy silence settles in for a moment before everything goes back to normal. I was house sitting for my aunt and uncle in Vermont, about 15 minutes outside Middlebury. They live up in the hills, real quiet, wooded on 3 sides, with a pond behind the property that usually draws frogs in the summer. It was early October, already getting cold enough at night to see your breath, but no snow yet. They'd gone to visit my cousin in Michigan for a week, and I offered to stay and watch the place, feed their dog, make sure the pipes didn't freeze. Their house sits at the end of a dirt road, maybe 5 other houses scattered along it, most hidden by trees. No street lights. The kind of place where your neighbors are half a mile away, and your cell service works only if you stand in the right corner of the kitchen. It happened the 3rd night I was there. That Wednesday had been uneventful. I walked their retriever Casey, made some soup, watched a movie on my laptop. Around 9:30, I was cleaning up the kitchen when the power cut out. Not a flicker. Just 1 second, everything was normal. And the next, I was standing in pitch black. At first, I thought it was the circuit breaker, but I looked out the front window and the whole road was out. Even the Johnson's motion light, which usually glows faintly through the trees, was dark. It was cloudy that night. No stars, no moonlight, just a uniform gray above, lit faintly by whatever ambient glow the world still had. I found the flashlight my uncle keeps in a drawer and checked the time on my phone, 9:37 p.m. I figured I'd wait it out. Sat down on the couch with Casey curled up at my feet, listening to the silence. It was almost total. No hum of the fridge, no distant traffic, no wind. Just that weird, dense quiet you only notice when all the electronics stop. Then the sky changed. I wasn't looking out the window when it started. I noticed it from the reflection on the coffee table. A soft, pale light pulsed once across the surface, cool and blue-white. I turned and saw the clouds through the living room windows glowing like there was a massive light source behind them. It wasn't lightning. There was no flicker, no bolts, and no sound. Just a slow, building brightness that reached a peak, hovered for maybe 5 seconds, then faded. That's when Casey started whining. He got up, tail tucked, and walked in a circle like he was nervous about something. He stared at the back door, then looked at me like he expected me to do something. I went to the window and looked out. Nothing. Trees, pond, darkness. The glow had faded completely, and the clouds looked normal again, just flat and gray. I stood there for a while, trying to listen. I thought I heard a humming sound, faint, high-pitched, but it could have been in my head. You know how silence sometimes plays tricks on you, like your ears are filling the gaps? Then the power came back on. Everything at once. Lights, fridge, the clock on the microwave flashing 12. It was 9:54, according to my phone. I checked the local outage map online, but nothing showed up. No reports. I probably would have written it off as weird weather or a transformer surge, except for what happened later. Around midnight, I was in bed reading. Casey was on the rug, asleep. I heard something outside, like footsteps crunching the gravel around the driveway. Not fast or loud, just 2 or 3 careful steps. I froze. There shouldn't have been anyone up there. My aunt and uncle don't get visitors, and you'd hear a car from half a mile out. I turned off the lamp and listened. Nothing. No more footsteps. I got up and crept to the side window, pulled the curtain an inch. The porch light was still off, but the motion sensor should have triggered if anyone had come close. I didn't see anything, just darkness between the trees. But when I looked down at the yard, I saw something wrong with the grass. There was a faint ring in the lawn, just a slightly lighter shade than the rest. I hadn't noticed it earlier that day when I took Casey out. It was maybe 20 feet across. Perfect circle. Too clean for lawn equipment, and the grass inside it looked flattened. I didn't go outside. I just stood there for a long time trying to make sense of it. At some point, I realized the light from the power outage, the glow behind the clouds, it had looked like it came from directly above that spot. Next morning, the circle was still there, faint but visible in the daylight. The grass wasn't burned, just pressed flat. Casey wouldn't go near it. I tried tossing a ball across the yard, and he stopped short when it rolled inside the ring. I took a picture with my phone, but it didn't capture much, just a slight difference in color. Later that day, I checked again. The circle was still there, but the grass inside had started to lift a little. By the time my aunt and uncle came back, you could barely see it. I didn't tell them. Not because I thought they wouldn't believe me, but because I didn't want to try and explain something I didn't understand myself. I left a day early, told them I had to get back to work, which wasn't true. I just wanted to be around people again. Cities, lights, sounds, anything but that quiet stretch of road and the weird silence under those clouds. I noticed the stars looked wrong before anything else happened. I was camping alone near the Coconino Rim, about 40 minutes outside Williams. It wasn't a serious backpacking trip or anything, just a quick overnight because work had been draining and I wanted a quiet night. I found a flat clearing off an old service road, pitched my tent, made some instant noodles, and sat back to watch the sky. It was one of those clear, dry nights where you could see every constellation like someone had wiped the sky clean. I was lying on my back on the foam pad outside the tent when I realized the stars directly above me seemed softer than the rest. Not dimmer, just slightly blurred, like I needed glasses. I blinked a few times, rubbed my eyes, even sat up, but the patch stayed fuzzy. It covered maybe a dinner plate's worth of sky if you held it at arm's length. Everything else looked sharp. I figured maybe some heat from my little camp stove was distorting the air, but the stove had been off for almost an hour. The air was still, no wind, no bugs buzzing near my ears, just dead, open quiet. I lay back down to stare at it. The blur didn't pulse or shimmer. It just existed, like a thin lens floating above me. I stared long enough that I started picking out individual stars inside the patch, and I saw something that made my stomach tighten. The stars inside the blur seemed to shift ever so slightly. Not twinkle, shift, like their positions were being nudged around. I sat up again, feeling stupid for getting nervous over something I couldn't even name. I told myself it was atmospheric ice crystals or some balloon drifting high enough to warp the light. But the more I watched, the more I realized the patch was moving. Slowly, but moving. It drifted about the length of my thumb held up to the sky, sliding westward. The rest of the sky held still, crisp and normal. Only that patch smeared like the stars were behind warped glass. I listened for a plane. Nothing. I listened for wind. Nothing. I checked my phone for the time, 10:47, and when I looked back up, the blurred patch had shifted farther, picking up speed so slowly I didn't notice until I compared its position to a line of bright stars along the horizon. Then something flashed inside the blur. Not bright enough to blind me, just a faint pulse, like distant lightning behind clouds. Except there weren't any clouds. Another pulse came a few seconds later, soft, bluish, dull around the edges. Not lighting up the ground, just faintly illuminating whatever was causing the distortion. I stood up, a little shaky, and walked a few steps toward the tree line. The pine needles under my boots barely made a sound, which felt strange on its own. Normally they crackle. That night they were like damp carpet. The blur drifted more quickly now, sliding across the sky with a steadiness that didn't fit anything I knew. Not a satellite, not a plane, not even a slow-moving cloud bank. It felt intentional, controlled, but too quiet and too slow for anything mechanical. When it passed a particularly bright star, the star elongated into a streak for a split second before snapping back into place once the blur moved on. I swallowed hard. My mouth felt dry. I stepped backward, bumping into my tent. That small sound, the tent poles rattling, felt jarring against the rest of the quiet. I backed inside and sat down, trying to keep the flap open so I could still see the sky. I didn't want to lose sight of whatever was happening, even though part of me didn't want to see any more. The blur moved toward the western ridge. Just as it reached the top of the tree line, a faint buzzing started. Not loud, not like an insect, more like the hum of a power line half a mile away. It vibrated in my chest more than in my ears. I held my breath without meaning to. The hum changed pitch, higher, then lower, then settling into something steady. Then it stopped, completely. The blur froze too, hovering in place above the ridge. I crawled halfway out of the tent, trying to keep some fabric between me and the open air for reasons I didn't fully understand. My head stuck out just enough to watch the sky. The blur stayed still for a long stretch of time. At least a minute, maybe more. It felt longer. I looked around at the clearing. The shadows from my small lantern were weirdly sharp, like the light wasn't diffusing normally. My tent's shadow stretched farther than it should have, thin and crisp. I turned the lantern off just to see if it made a difference. The clearing went dark, but the tent shadow stayed faintly visible, even without a light source. That's when I got goosebumps. I turned the lantern back on immediately, just to break the feeling. In the sky, the blur finally moved again. Not the drifting motion from before. This time it slid sideways in a perfectly straight line. Too smooth, too exact. It shifted like a cursor on a screen, then paused again. Another soft flash glimmered inside it, this one slightly brighter. Still no beam, no shape, just the faintest glow contained within the distortion. The hum started again. This time it came with a faint fluctuation in the air pressure, like when you drive through a tunnel with the window cracked. My ears popped. I ducked back into the tent completely, pulled the zipper halfway, then stopped myself. Zipping it all the way felt worse somehow, like I needed to be able to see out. The hum rose, then stopped for the second time. I waited for whatever would follow. Nothing happened for almost 30 seconds. Then the blur began to stretch. It elongated into an oval, thinning along one edge like it was being pulled. The stars inside the stretched area warped like reflections in rippling water. The blur grew longer and longer until it didn't look like a patch anymore. It looked like a line, a faint smear cutting across the night. Then it snapped back into its original shape. Just snapped. Instant. I gasped quietly. That sudden motion made my heart lurch. I backed away from the tent flap without closing it, pressing myself against the far wall of the nylon like it offered real protection. The blur began drifting again, this time faster, heading west, away from my campsite. As it moved, the stars behind it regained their sharpness, like the sky was returning to normal piece by piece. The hum faded with it, thinning until it was barely noticeable, then gone. I crawled forward again, watching the blur shrink as the distance grew. It didn't fade exactly. It just got smaller, like it was moving impossibly far away very quickly. At a certain point, I couldn't tell if it was still the blur or just a patch of cloud. Then it condensed into a small point of soft light. The point blinked once, then disappeared. Just like that. The sky was perfectly clear afterward. Every star sharp, every constellation where it should be. The air moved again, too. I felt a breeze lift the edge of my tent flap and brush my cheek. It was such a normal sensation that it felt surreal. I stepped outside, slowly, scanning the treetops and ridgeline. Nothing unusual. The buzzing was gone. The weird shadows from the lantern looked normal again. I stood there for maybe 20 minutes, turning in slow circles like an idiot, trying to catch any lingering trace of what I'd seen. There was nothing. Eventually, I sat back on the foam pad, exactly where I'd been when the night started feeling strange. The stars looked completely ordinary. I didn't sleep well. Every rustle in the trees made me sit up. Every shift of wind made me check the sky, but the blur didn't return. In the morning, the campsite looked untouched, but something felt different. Not physically, just a heaviness in the air, like the night had left a residue my mind couldn't shake. I packed up camp earlier than planned. On the drive back toward town, I stopped at a turnout and stepped out to look at the sky again. Bright blue. Normal. But as I stood there, a weird feeling settled in me, like the clarity of the sky was too perfect, like something had smoothed it over. That feeling hasn't gone away completely, and sometimes when I'm outside late and the sky is really still, I catch myself staring up for a long time, waiting to see that slight blur sliding across the stars again. I heard the sound before anything else. A low, steady rhythm coming from somewhere above the tree line, almost like breathing. Not the sharp kind you hear from an animal, but long and drawn out, as if something huge was pulling air in and letting it go. I was standing by the fire ring behind my cabin in northern Maine, part of the woods my uncle used to hunt in before he moved to Florida. The night was cold enough for my breath to fog, but not snowing yet. The fire had burned down to embers, and I was about to turn in. At first, I thought it was wind catching on the ridge behind the trees, but the branches weren't moving. Not even a little. Everything was still, like the woods were frozen in a way the weather couldn't explain. The sound came again, slow, almost mechanical in rhythm, but too soft and uneven to be anything man-made. I stood there with my hands tucked under my arms, trying to place it. The woods were usually full of noise, owls, the creek, the occasional rustle of deer, but that night everything felt muted, like I was hearing the world through insulation. I grabbed my flashlight from the patio table and shined it toward the trees. The moment the beam went upward, the breathing-like sound stopped completely. No fade out, just gone. I kept the light steady on the branches, scanning for an owl or something perched up there. Nothing moved. The air felt heavier, almost pressed down. I waited for the sound to start again, but all I heard was my own heartbeat speeding up. I lowered the flashlight, thinking maybe I'd scared off whatever it was. The sound started again, slower this time. I snapped the light upward. Silence. This repeated twice. I lifted and lowered the flashlight like an idiot, testing something I didn't want to be real. Light up. Silence. Light down. Breathing. After the third time, the rhythm changed, shortened into quicker bursts, almost impatient. That was when I went inside and shut the sliding door. I didn't lock it at first, I don't know why, but once I was in the dim warmth of the cabin, the woods suddenly felt too close. I slid the bolt across. The cabin wasn't big. One main room, a small kitchen, a tiny bedroom with a bed barely wider than me. Everything smelled like old cedar and the cheap candles I kept forgetting to throw out. I turned on a couple of lights, but they flickered in a strange way. Not off and on, just dimming briefly like the bulbs were stretching themselves thin. I checked my phone on the counter. No service, which was normal. When I walked past the window above the sink, a faint glow caught my eye. It was subtle, almost bleached looking, seeping between the trees in the far part of the yard. It wasn't moonlight. The moon was a thin sliver and nowhere near that part of the sky, and it wasn't coming from the direction of the nearest town. That was 15 minutes away by car. The glow was still, pale, like someone had hung a soft white sheet behind the tree line and backlit it. I turned off the sink light to cut the glare, leaning closer to the window. The glow didn't brighten or move. It just stayed fixed in place, lighting the shapes of the branches from behind. I grabbed the flashlight again. My hand was shaking enough that I nearly dropped it. I aimed it out the back door window, not opening it this time, and shined it toward the glow. Same thing as before. Silence. The breathing sound cut off instantly. The glow faded slightly, shrinking in on itself. I lowered the flashlight. The sound didn't return, but something else did. A faint rustling, not on the ground, but above, somewhere high in the trees, like something shifting its weight on a wide branch. Too controlled and slow to be a squirrel. Too steady to be the wind. Then the glow moved. Not quickly, not suddenly. It just drifted sideways, like fog sliding through the tree trunks, except fog doesn't move in a straight line and it doesn't keep its shape the way this did. The pale light remained soft and uniform as it slipped deeper into the woods, disappearing behind the thickest part of the tree line. The moment it vanished, the cabin lights flickered again. I backed away from the window, trying to steady my breathing. I wasn't panicking exactly, but the quiet was doing something to my nerves. I grabbed my jacket and hat, thinking I might try to sleep, even if sleeping felt impossible. But before I reached the bedroom, something hit the roof. Not a heavy thud, more like a dull tap, followed by a series of dragging noises that circled slowly toward the back of the cabin. I froze mid-step. The dragging continued, an uneven scrape across the shingles, pausing every few seconds like whatever was doing it was adjusting its position. I whispered no, without thinking. The scraping suddenly sped up, crossing the roof toward the far corner. Then it stopped completely. For a full minute, I didn't move. My muscles locked up on their own. I kept waiting for something else, a thump, a shadow, anything, but the roof stayed quiet. I crept to the window nearest the back corner and pushed the curtain aside just enough to peek. I aimed the flashlight upward, but the angle was wrong. The beam caught nothing but branches. The rhythmic breathing returned, but this time it wasn't coming from above the tree line, it was coming from the roof, directly above me. I snapped the flashlight beam upward through the window. Instant silence. The dragging sound began again, crawling toward the opposite end of the roof. I lowered the light slowly, and the dragging softened, then stopped. The breathing didn't return. I backed away from the window, feeling suddenly very small in the middle of the one-room cabin. I sat on the edge of the bed with the flashlight in my lap, trying to listen past the ringing in my ears. The roof stayed silent for several minutes. The woods stayed still. When the sound returned again, it was faint and far away, back where the glow had disappeared earlier. A soft, rhythmic inhale-exhale pattern, low and patient. It felt distant, but not gone. I lay down fully clothed, keeping the flashlight in my hand. Sleep came in short, tense bursts. Every time I drifted off, I startled awake at the slightest noise, the cabin settling, a twig snapping outside, the faint creak of the rafters. Around 4 a.m, the light outside changed. I saw it through the cracks in the blinds first. A subtle brightness moving between the trees again, low and quiet. The rhythm had stopped. Everything was still. I listened for a long time, waiting for another sound, but nothing came. Eventually, the glow faded, retreating into the woods until the darkness looked normal again. I stayed awake until dawn. When the sun finally came up, the cabin felt ordinary. The trees swayed lightly with the morning breeze, like the woods had been asleep all night instead of whatever I had witnessed. I stepped outside carefully, scanning the roof. No damage, no disturbed shingles, nothing out of place. I walked to the clearing where I'd seen the glow. The ground looked untouched. No footprints, no broken branches. The wind moved normally now, rustling the leaves, carrying the usual smell of pine and cold earth. I packed up my gear faster than I ever had before and drove back to town without looking in the rear view more than necessary. That night, in my apartment hours away from the cabin, I tried to sleep again. Just before drifting off, I thought I heard a low rhythmic sound, barely audible, almost imagined, coming from somewhere above the building. I turned on the light. The sound stopped. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I noticed the light almost by accident. I was walking home from my friend Layla's place on the edge of town, cutting through the older neighborhood where the streetlights were spaced out and most houses sat dark after 9. It was early October, one of those cool nights where the air smelled like wet leaves even though it hadn't rained. The sky was mostly cloudy, but the moon kept slipping in and out, just enough to see my breath sometimes. I was halfway down Keller Street when something made me look up. A dim glow slipped between 2 thick clouds overhead. At first, I figured it was a plane, maybe one of the late cargo flights that passed through the area, but this light moved differently. It drifted instead of flying, slow and smooth, like someone pushing a lantern across the sky on invisible string. I stopped walking, trying to get a better look through the gaps in the trees. The light stopped, too. I thought it was coincidence. I even laughed under my breath. But when I took another step, the light glided forward again, keeping its gentle pace. It didn't blink or pulse. It didn't change color. It was just a muted yellowish sphere, barely bright enough to outline the edges of the clouds it slipped behind. I wasn't scared yet, mostly curious. Keller Street was empty as usual, the kind of road where you can walk 10 minutes without hearing a single car. I stepped to the side, light near a low stone wall around someone's front yard, and kept watching the sky. The light drifted for a few seconds more before pausing again, almost like it was checking that I hadn't moved. The longer I stood there, the more I realized how quiet the whole neighborhood was. No crickets, no distant engines. Even the wind felt like it was holding back. The leaves on the trees hung motionless. I walked another 50 feet down the sidewalk. The light followed, staying at the same angle above me. It didn't zigzag or swoop or anything dramatic. Just the same steady drift, like a slow balloon. But balloons don't hover perfectly still when someone stops walking. I turned onto Brooklawn Avenue, which had fewer trees. The sky opened up a bit, and I finally saw the shape more clearly. It wasn't perfectly round up close, more like a flattened oval, faint at the edges, like it was wrapped in a thin fog. There were no points of light on it, like nothing mechanical looking, no silhouette of anything solid, just that soft glow. A dog barked behind one of the fences, sharp and sudden, and the light dimmed for half a second. Not vanished, dimmed. Then it brightened back to its normal dull glow. The dog barked again, more frantic this time, then went completely silent. I tried to rationalize it, maybe a weather balloon, though I'd never seen one at night. Maybe a drone, though it didn't make any sound. Maybe a trick of the moon through the clouds, but the moon was hidden again, and the glow moved independently of the cloud cover. I was 5 minutes from home, and every second of the walk felt stranger. Whenever I looked away, at the houses, the sidewalk, my own shoes, I felt a pressure on the back of my neck, like I was being watched from directly above, not stared at, observed. I passed the empty playground behind the elementary school. The swings, usually creaking in the slightest breeze, hung dead still. I kept glancing at the sky through the open area above the basketball court. The light was there each time, maintaining its drifting pace. I decided, stupidly, to test it. I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk and took 3 steps backward. The light froze, completely motionless. I waited. 30 seconds, maybe more. It didn't move. Then I took 3 steps forward. The light glided forward again, stacked like nothing had interrupted it. That was the moment the fear really settled in. I still didn't run. Something in me worried that running would change whatever was happening, make it worse. So I stayed at my normal walking pace, hands shoved in my jacket pockets, eyes flicking up every few seconds. As I reached the corner of Maple Crest Drive, the clouds thinned just enough for the glow to sharpen. I thought I saw something around it, a faint halo like heat rising off asphalt, except it moved in slow spirals instead of wavering. It wrapped around the glow but didn't touch it, kind of orbiting it at random speeds. The whole thing made no sound at all. My house sat 3 blocks ahead. That should have been comforting, but the idea of going home while that thing kept pace with me felt wrong. Still, I didn't know what else to do. I turned onto my street. The glow dipped lower. Not a lot. Maybe the height of a 3-story building, but enough that it lit the tops of the pine trees lining the road. Their needles reflected the yellowish tint, and for a moment the whole street looked washed out like an old photograph. I remember whispering, "Please stop," like the thing could hear me. I didn't even know who I was talking to or what I expected, but the words slipped out before I could think. The glow paused mid-drift. I froze so hard it hurt my jaw. The air around me felt thick, like humidity right before lightning strikes, but there was no storm. The clouds didn't move, the glow didn't sway, everything sat suspended. After a few seconds, the glow started moving again, but this time it didn't follow me. It drifted sideways, farther down Maple Crest, sliding between 2 clouds so slowly it looked like it was being pulled along by string underwater. It didn't speed up as it gained distance. It just went. I stood in the road until it finally faded into the cloud cover and disappeared completely. The second it vanished, the wind kicked up out of nowhere. Leaves rustled, the pine trees swayed, a flag on someone's porch snapped loudly. The world started existing again. I didn't walk home so much as stumble there, checking the sky every few seconds even though the glow was gone. The streetlights flickered once when I passed under them, but that might have been my nerves making everything feel strange. Inside my house, everything looked normal, but I kept all the lights on anyway. I made tea because I didn't know what else to do. My hands shook the entire time. I kept expecting the glow to show up outside the kitchen window, hovering above the driveway. Nothing happened. I finally went to bed around 4, but sleep didn't last long. I woke again at 7 to sunlight and a text from Layla asking if I got home okay. I told her yes. I didn't tell her anything else. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined parts of it or misinterpreted something ordinary. But that day, while I walked to the mailbox, I noticed something odd on the pavement. A thin line of dust or pollen traced a faint curve on my street. A perfect arc, almost symmetrical, directly beneath where the glow had paused the longest. No one else seemed to notice. Cars drove over it, kids biked across it, but each time I passed, I saw the shape clearly. Over the next week, the line faded until it was gone. Everything went back to the usual rhythm. Same sidewalks, same trees, same sky. Except, once in a while, usually late at night when the clouds move slow, I catch a dim glow slipping behind them, never close, never following me, just drifting. But every time I stop walking, even for a moment, I swear the glow pauses too. I felt it before I saw anything. The sudden, sharp awareness that something was above me, not behind me, not in the trees, not out on the road. Above. It was so strong and out of nowhere that I actually stopped. I'd been heading back to my tri-truck after checking the trail cameras near Eagle Bluff, just outside Missoula. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the sky looks washed out from leftover heat and the woods feel emptied after a long day. I stood there on the dirt trail, boot halfway in the air, heart thumping for no reason I could explain. Nothing made a sound, not even the insects. The pines around me looked normal in the fading light, their tips barely catching the last bit of sunset. I tried to shake the feeling off as nerves, maybe dehydration. But the awareness didn't fade. It grew heavier, almost like someone lowered a weight onto the top of my skull. I finally forced myself to look up. There was a single point of light suspended high above the treetops. At first, I thought it was a star, except it was too early in the evening for the stars to be out, and the light was too bright against the pale sky. It was a tiny white dot, sharp-edged, unnatural in how still it sat. I blinked a few times, waiting for it to move like a satellite or plane. It didn't move. It froze in exactly the same spot, not even a wobble. I don't know how long I stared at it, maybe 10 seconds, maybe more. My chest felt tight, like I was holding my breath without meaning to. The point of light hovered directly above me, centered perfectly, as if it had always been there and was just waiting for me to notice. Then as I watched, it dimmed. Not abruptly, slowly, like someone was turning down a dial. The edges softened first, then the brightness drained away until the dot was barely visible. Then it simply blended into the sky and was gone. The moment it disappeared, the awareness vanished too, like a switch had been flipped off. I stood there in the weird quiet, trying to convince myself it had been a drone or some reflective debris catching the sun, but nothing about it felt right. The fading light, the frozen stillness, that pressure in my head, it all lingered in a way I couldn't shake. I made myself walk again. The woods felt too open now, as like every direction strange. Even though the sun hadn't fully set, the shadows between the trees looked darker than usual. I kept glancing up, half expecting to see the light flick back on. The sky was empty. As I got closer to the trailhead, I noticed something else off. The air temperature dropped abruptly, like stepping from summer into early fall. A breeze drifted through the trees, but it wasn't cool in a normal way. It felt flat, hollow, like the air had lost its warmth instead of replaced it. I zipped up my jacket and checked my watch. It said 8:26 p.m. That didn't match my memory. I thought it had been barely 8:05 when I'd first stopped. I tried to blame the sinking sun for confusing me, but unease crawled up my spine anyway. When I stepped into the clearing where I'd parked, I spotted my truck immediately. But something about it looked wrong. I walked up to the driver's side door and realized what it was. The interior dome light was on. I knew for a fact I'd turned it off when I left. I never leave it on. It drains the battery. I pulled the door open slowly. The air inside the truck was warmer than outside, like it had been sealed all day instead of sitting open to the evening chill. The dome light flickered once when I leaned in, a soft blink that didn't match the truck's usual electrical quirks. I sat in the driver's seat and closed the door. The forest around me felt too quiet again, like sound couldn't get through the windows. Before starting the engine, I looked at the sky through the windshield. Nothing. But the longer I stared, the heavier the silence felt. When I finally turned the key, the radio crackled, just one sharp burst of static before settling into silence. The dashboard lights flickered faintly, then steadied. I checked the battery indicator. Normal. The engine sounded fine. I backed out of the clearing and started down the dirt road toward the main highway. The truck's headlights cut through the pines in long, shaky shadows. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the point of light hovering above the trees behind me. About a mile down, the forest opened up into a long, narrow valley. The sky beyond the pines was darker now, the first real stars beginning to appear. I drove slower than usual, trying to shake off the feeling in my chest. Then I felt it again, that heavy awareness, like someone pressing a palm on the top of my head. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, breath-catching. I didn't want to look up this time. The urge to keep my eyes on the road was overwhelming, like looking up would invite something I wasn't ready to see. But the awareness didn't go away. It grew sharper, more focused. Finally, I forced myself to lift my eyes to the windshield. Nothing. Just the darkening sky and the edge of the valley. But when I checked the rearview mirror, I saw it, the point of light, far behind me now, hovering just above the line of trees in the distance. Not moving, not blinking, just watching the road from far away. I pressed the accelerator. The truck groaned a little as it climbed the shallow rise toward the highway, gravel pinging against the undercarriage. I kept glancing at the mirror. The light stayed the same size, same brightness. It didn't give chase, it didn't grow smaller with distance. It stayed fixed as if distance didn't matter. When I finally reached the paved road and turned left toward Missoula, the point of light slipped behind a ridge. I didn't see it again. The awareness faded as suddenly as it had come. The rest of the drive felt strange but uneventful. My radio stayed dead. The dome light blinked once more when I got home, but stayed off after that. Inside my house, everything looked normal. The ceiling fan hummed, the fridge kicked on, the world was back to its usual noises. But as I stood on my porch before going inside, I looked up at the sky one more time. Just stars, just night, nothing out of place. Still, that sense of being watched lingered faintly at the edges of my mind, like something waiting behind the dark. And when a star near the eastern horizon flickered, just once too deliberately, I stepped back inside and shut the door. I was sitting by the river because I couldn't sleep. It was early June, warm but not muggy yet, and the kind of night where the water sounded louder than usual. I'd driven out to the stretch near Burley Ford, the spot my friend Marin and I used to fish when we were teenagers. Back then, we'd come during the day, but lately I'd been going at night, when the place felt empty and the only things moving were the water and whatever stirred in the trees. I parked under the sycamore tree and walked the short path to the bank. The moon was bright enough that I didn't need my phone light. The river wasn't deep there, maybe waist high in the middle, and it moved slow, just a steady push downstream that carried leaves and bark and whatever else fell into it. I sat on the flat rock I always used, elbows on my knees, staring at the ripples. I wasn't out there more than 10 minutes before something changed in the water. The ripples started bending in a weird way, like something was cutting beneath the surface. Not big, just enough to catch my attention. At first I thought it was a fish, maybe a trout cruising upstream, but the movement didn't match anything alive. It was too straight, too smooth. Then I saw the light, a thin line of pale white, faint enough that I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. It stretched maybe 2 feet long and shimmered just beneath the surface, moving upstream against the current. Slowly, steadily. The water above it barely distorted. It was like the current didn't matter to whatever it was. I sat completely still, leaning forward without meaning to. The line of light moved in a perfectly straight path, gliding right through patches of floating leaves without disturbing them. It didn't wobble or flicker, just a soft, constant glow. I glanced around, trying to find a source. No flashlights, no houses nearby. The moon was too far to reflect like that. My car headlights were off. Nothing else should have been shining into the water. When I looked back, the light had gotten closer, maybe 20 feet away now. Just a thin glowing strip moving silently beneath the surface. For a moment, I had the weirdest thought that it was scanning the riverbed. No idea where that came from, but the thought hit me hard enough that I held my breath. As it moved, I noticed something else. The current around it slowed. Only by a little, but enough that the floating debris seemed to hesitate as the glow passed under them, like the water itself was being tugged or held. That's when I finally stood up. The moment I shifted my weight, the light dipped downward, almost like it noticed me. It didn't vanish. It just sank slightly deeper, the glow dimming to a dull haze. I stepped closer to the edge. Bad idea. The light responded, but not the way I expected. It didn't retreat or shoot off. It stopped. Completely. A motionless stripe of white hovering under the water. The current flowed over it like it wasn't even there. My pulse hammered in my ears. I crouched down, watching the way the glow outlined the stones on the riverbed. It made the rocks look flat, like the shine was erasing their texture. The whole thing looked wrong, like it wasn't illuminating the stones, but replacing their shadows with something else. Then it started moving again. Not upstream this time, sideways, toward me. It wasn't fast, but the directness of it scared me more than speed would have. I froze in a crouch, unable to make my legs work. The light glided closer, brightening just slightly, enough that the water above it turned the color of milk. When it got within 10 feet, the surface shifted. Not a splash. More like a pulse, one soft upward bulge of water, as if something underneath had exhaled. I took a step backward without standing fully. My foot slipped on the dirt, and I hit the ground harder than I meant to. The impact jolted me out of whatever trance I'd been in. I scrambled up, staring at the river. The light paused again, holding position. The river was silent, no current sound, no insects, just my own breathing and that strange hush you only hear right before something happens. I forced myself to speak out loud, just to break it. "What is this?" Of course, nothing answered. The light brightened again, widening a little, not stretching, just expanding at the edges like it was swelling. The pale strip looked less like light and more like something solid glowing from within. I backed up another step, glancing at the path behind me in case I needed to bolt. When I looked back at the water, the light was rising. Slowly. The glow pushed up through the surface without breaking it. The water didn't splash or part. It just flowed around the light, bending in unnatural curves. Like the glow wasn't in the water at all, but in some space just beneath it. My throat tightened. When the light reached maybe a foot from the surface, it flickered. Not dimming, but shifting side to side, like it was adjusting or vibrating. Then it snapped back into a straight line and began gliding upstream again, faster this time. The water resumed its normal sound, like someone had turned the volume back up. I followed it with my eyes until it got about 40 feet upriver. That's when it disappeared, not faded, not slipped deeper, just blinked out like a switch had been flipped. I stood there alone in the quiet, waiting to see if it would return. Nothing happened for almost 2 minutes. Then something tapped the surface of the river, one single, hollow plink, like someone flicked the water with a fingernail. I flinched, whipping my head toward the sound, but all I saw were ripples spreading in a perfect circle. I stepped back to the rock I'd been sitting on and sat down slowly. My legs were shaky. I kept staring at the spot where the light had vanished. Every little movement of water made me think it would reappear. While I sat there, I noticed another thing. All the usual nighttime sounds were still gone. No crickets. No wind in the branches overhead. Even the distant hum from the highway was missing. Right as I realized that, a faint glow appeared again, farther upstream this time. Not a line, just a soft pulse like someone waving a flashlight underwater. It flickered once, twice, then held steady. I stood again, unable to help myself. The pulsing light drifted back and forth in a small area, like it was searching. Then it began moving downstream toward me, not in a straight line this time, but in slow arcs, curving back and forth. The movement reminded me of someone sweeping a metal detector in long passes. I stepped back from the bank until my heels hit the grass. The light approached within maybe 50 feet and then dipped sharply, sinking so fast it looked like it dropped through a hole in the riverbed. The glow faded as it went, shrinking more quickly than it should have. Then it was gone again. This time it didn't come back. The sounds returned in pieces. First the river current, then whine through the leaves, then a few insects. The transition felt unnatural, like a switch flipping each part of the world back on one at a time. I stayed a while longer, waiting, watching. Nothing else unusual happened. The river looked normal. The night felt normal. Everything slipped back into place as if nothing strange had ever occurred. I walked back to my car slowly, checking over my shoulder more than I'd like to admit. Halfway up the path, I realized my shirt was damp with sweat, even though the night was cool. My heart finally slowed once I got the doors locked. When I turned the key, the headlights flickered. Not off, just dim for a second. I froze with my hands still on the key. The lights steadied again. I drove home, watching the rearview mirror every few minutes, even though the road behind me was empty. I didn't tell anyone the next day. Didn't go back to the river for over a month. When I finally did, the place felt normal again. Water clear, current steady, no strange lights, no sudden silence, but I still catch myself staring at the riverbed whenever I'm there, wondering if a thin line of pale glow is going to start sliding beneath the surface again, moving in ways nothing underwater should. It was around 1:15 in the morning when I first heard it. I just turned off the TV in the living room and was heading to bed. The house was completely quiet, no appliances running, no cars outside. It was one of those nights where the stillness feels heavier than usual. No wind, no crickets, not even the distant hum from the highway a few miles off. I live in a small ranch-style house just outside of Iron Ridge, Wisconsin. Not much around here. A couple neighbors spaced out along the road, lots of trees, lots of quiet. My yard backs up to a thicket of woods that goes on for acres. I've seen deer, raccoons, the occasional owl, normal stuff. Nothing bigger than a stray dog. Anyway, I was brushing my teeth when I heard it, a slow, deliberate thump overhead. Just one, then a pause, then another. Not like something fell. Not random. Footsteps. Measured. Heavy enough to feel faintly through the ceiling. I froze. Toothbrush still in my mouth. Thump, thump, thump. I turned off the water and stood still, listening. It moved from the far end of the house above the guest bedroom toward the center. Not fast, not dragging. Just one step at a time. I walked out into the hallway, barefoot, and pressed my hand to the ceiling. I didn't feel anything vibrating, but the sound was clearer there. The steps passed right over me. I live alone, no pets, no trees hanging over the roof. There was no wind that night, and the forecast had been clear, cool, dry, mid-40s. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but it wasn't a squirrel or raccoon. I've heard animals up there before. This wasn't that. I went to the kitchen, grabbed the flashlight I keep in the drawer by the fridge, and unlocked the back door. The yard was dead quiet. No wind, no movement. The woods loomed behind the house, but I couldn't hear a thing coming from them. I flicked the flashlight on and stepped out onto the patio. No sounds now. I angled the beam up at the roof. From that side, I can only see part of it, sloping away from me toward the front of the house. Nothing there. I walked out to the lawn, tilted the light higher, and caught just a brief glimpse of something strange. Not on the roof, but above it. It was a faint glow, high up, almost washed out by the darkness. Pale and bluish, kind of like the color of TV static. The shape wasn't clear. It didn't have edges exactly, but it was moving. Upward. Slowly. It wasn't a drone. I've seen those. This was quieter than a drone, completely silent, and the way it moved, it didn't wobble or blink. It rose steady like it was being pulled. I watched it climb into the sky until it passed into the low-hanging clouds above the trees. The light didn't shine through the clouds, it just faded, like it was absorbed. The second it disappeared, the flashlight in my hand flickered. Just once. Then came back. I turned and looked at the house. Nothing on the roof. No movement. No sound. But the air felt different, warmer maybe, or charged somehow. My skin felt tight. I walked slowly back to the house, sweeping the beam across the roofline one more time. Still nothing. When I got inside, I locked the door behind me and stood there for a few minutes, listening. The house was quiet again. I checked the attic, even though it didn't make sense. No signs of animals, no broken vents or gaps. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up on the couch with the flashlight beside me, half watching the muted TV. At some point, I must have dozed off, but I kept waking up thinking I heard movement outside. Never caught anything. The next morning, I checked the roof from the yard. No damage, no tracks, just a few fallen leaves. I haven't heard the steps again, but now, every time it's quiet like that, when the wind dies down and the trees aren't moving, I find myself staring at the ceiling, waiting. It was around 10:30 on a Thursday night, early October. I just finished cleaning up dinner and remembered the trash had to go out. Collection was Friday morning. I was barefoot, wearing just a hoodie and old sweatpants, walking the can down the side of the house to the curb. It had been a quiet night. No wind, just that cold stillness that settles in when the temperature drops quick after dark. We live in a cul-de-sac outside of Medford, Oregon. Suburban, but on the edge of a more rural patch. A few houses, big yards, and nothing but woods behind our fence line. I got to the curb and popped the lid shut on the can when I noticed a soft light to my left, like someone had flicked on a porch lamp across the way. But it wasn't a lamp. Across the street, just above the Wilkinson's house, maybe 20-25 feet above their roofline, there was a pale bluish-white light. Oval-shaped, not blinking, not swaying, just hanging there. The Wilkinsons were out of town that week, so I knew it wasn't them messing with anything. My first thought was drone, but it didn't move like a drone. No tilt, no hum, completely still. And it wasn't that sharp LED white most drones have. This was softer, almost foggy, like light shining through frosted glass. I stood there watching it for maybe 10 seconds, and I don't remember hearing a thing. No bugs, no breeze, no distant traffic, just silence. I looked down the street, no other lights, no other people. Just the yellow porch glow from a few houses and that pale thing over the roof. Then it dimmed. Not all at once. It faded like someone turning down a dimmer switch slowly. When it got to the point I could barely see it, it didn't fly off or move. It just vanished, like it blinked out. I stood there for a full minute, staring at the spot. Nothing. No sound, no movement. Just the same quiet street I've lived on for 12 years. I went back inside and locked the door behind me. Didn't say anything to my wife, Erin. She was already half asleep on the couch. The next morning, I walked across the street before work, just to see. There was nothing on the Wilkinsons' lawn or roof. No signs of anyone having been there. No scorched patches, no tire tracks, nothing out of place. I tried to forget about it. Figured maybe I saw a reflection. Maybe someone behind me opened a window and it caught some light weird. But that night, around the same time, I was in the kitchen finishing dishes when the motion light in our backyard clicked on. I glanced out the window, thinking maybe a raccoon or one of the stray cats from down the hill. There was nothing, just the yard. Still, dimly lit, leaves shifting in the breeze. But the light stayed on longer than it should have. Usually it turns off after 30 seconds, but this time it lasted a full minute before shutting off. I didn't go outside. The third night, Saturday, is when things got harder to explain. Around 10:45, I stepped out to grab a hoodie from the car. It had rained earlier and the air was damp. I didn't notice anything at first, but as I walked up the driveway, I felt something shift, like pressure in my ears, almost like when you're gaining altitude in a plane. A soft, muffled pop, then that thick quiet again, like sound was being soaked up by something. I turned around and looked across the street. Nothing above the Wilkinsons this time, but farther off, past the end of the cul-de-sac, above the tree line, I saw movement. Something dark shifted against the sky. It wasn't lit, and it wasn't shaped like a plane or bird. It was wide and slow and wrong. I froze. Tried to trace it, but it blended into the sky so well I could only track it by what stars it blocked out. Just like a smear in the air. No lights, no sound. It floated past, maybe 200 or 300 feet up, heading east over the trees, and then I couldn't see it anymore. I stood there, hand on the driver's side door, until a car came down the street, headlights snapping me out of it. When they passed, everything felt normal again. Ears unpopped, night sounds returned, motion light didn't go off, nothing dramatic, but I couldn't shake the feeling something had just been here, watching. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Woke up at 3:17 a.m. on the dot. No sound, no dream, just wide awake. I lay there for a while, trying not to look at the window, not really sure why. The next morning, I checked the cameras. We have two. One doorbell cam, one mounted over the garage. Both record motion-triggered clips to a cloud account. I scanned through the feed from 10 p.m. to midnight the night before. There was nothing. Literally nothing. No clips, just a gap. It jumped from 9:53 p.m. to 12:12 a.m., like the system just didn't detect anything, which was weird because it should have picked up me going to the car or that passing vehicle. It always does. I checked the camera settings, all normal. Wi-Fi was solid, timestamp accurate. I even walked out to test it. The second I stepped into the frame, it recorded me just fine. I told Erin about all of it that evening. Not the first night, but the past two. The silence, the thing over the trees, the camera weirdness. She kind of brushed it off, said maybe I was overtired, maybe the software glitched, so I didn't press it. But I kept paying attention. A week went by with nothing. No lights, no motion triggers, no waking up at 3 a.m. Then on a Wednesday, I came home from work and something was off the second I walked in. The kitchen clock was flashing 12. Microwave too. We hadn't lost power, nothing else was blinking. My laptop was still logged in, Erin's phone still charged. I asked her if she noticed the clocks. She just frowned and said no, said they were normal when she left for work at 7:30. So sometime between 7:30 and 6 p.m., only the kitchen clocks reset and nothing else. That night I took the trash out again around 10:20. Sky was overcast, no stars. I stood in the driveway a little longer than usual, just watching. And there it was again, this time farther back, above the trees behind the Wilkinsons' property. Same pale, hazy light, hovering, not moving, no beam, just there. I didn't go any closer. I didn't look away. I just stood there, breathing slow, staring at it for what felt like a full minute. Then it dimmed, same as before, slow, soft, until it was gone. The second it vanished, my porch light flickered once, just a quick blink, then back to normal. I turned and went inside. I didn't check the cameras, didn't want to know if they saw it or not. I just made sure the door was locked, drew the blinds, and went to bed. I was hiking alone near Mount Eldon, just outside of Flagstaff, Arizona, late last fall. It was something I'd been doing more of, solo hikes after work to get away from everything. I lived in a small apartment downtown and worked remote for a software company, so getting outside in the evenings felt like the only way I could stay sane. That day had been warm for October, mid-60s, with clear skies. It was a dry heat that stuck around through dusk, the kind that makes the air feel bigger somehow. I'd taken the Fat Man's Loop trail, but branched off at one of the unmarked footpaths that lead a little higher up the slope. The sun had just gone down, and I was planning to stay long enough to catch some stars before heading back. I had a small flashlight in my jacket and one of those trail map apps on my phone that worked offline. I found a little clearing near a pile of volcanic rock, flat enough to sit on, and dropped my pack. The light was fading fast, but it wasn't completely dark yet. You know that in-between time when everything goes kind of gray and quiet? That's where I was. I pulled out my phone just to see how much time I had until full dark. The screen lit up fine, but the compass on the map app was spinning. I'd used the same app 100 times before. Usually it orients almost instantly, but this time the compass needle just kept turning in slow, perfect circles. North would settle for half a second, then it would jump and keep rotating. At first, I thought maybe I was standing too close to something metal, but there wasn't anything around me. Just dirt, rock, and a few scattered pine trees. I stood still and held the phone out away from me, trying to recalibrate it. That's when I noticed something overhead. There was a small point of light in the sky. Not bright like a star, more like a glint or reflection. It looked almost stationary at first. But when I focused on it, I realized it was moving. Not across the sky, but in a slow, tight circle. Perfectly round, tight enough that you wouldn't notice it if you weren't staring right at it. It didn't blink or fade. It just glided in that same circular path over and over, silent, steady. I looked around. The trail below was empty. No distant flashlights, no headlamps, no plane sounds, no wind. Total stillness. And that weirdly smooth movement overhead like it was being drawn by a compass itself. I thought maybe it was a drone. That seemed like the most logical guess. But I've seen drones and they don't move like that. They hum or buzz or wobble a little. This thing was completely silent, and it wasn't blinking red or green like most consumer drones. It was just that soft white point, circling. I tried taking a video with my phone, but as soon as I pointed it up, the camera went out of focus. Total blur. I tapped the screen, adjusted the settings, even tried switching apps. Nothing. Every time I aimed it at the sky, the image warped like a heat haze. The compass was still spinning. I went into the phone's sensor settings, and even the gyroscope reading was bouncing slightly, like it couldn't lock into position. I stood there for a few more minutes, like holding perfectly still. That light didn't stop circling, it didn't move away, it didn't fade, just kept going around and around in the exact same spot. Then all at once, it stopped. Not like it slowed down or drifted off. It just paused mid-circle and hung there, completely still. I froze. My hands were cold now and the hairs on my neck were standing up. I don't usually spook easy, but something about the way that light just watched, I guess. It felt like it was watching. I didn't move, didn't blink. The clearing around me felt wrong, like it was waiting for something too. After maybe 10 seconds, the point of light zipped off. Not in an arc, not gradually, just gone. Like it stretched into a streak for a split second, then disappeared into the sky. The compass on my phone stopped spinning. It settled immediately. North locked in. The maps snapped back into place. The gyroscope readings flattened. Everything on the phone was normal again. I didn't even get an alert or anything. It just reset. I didn't stay to watch the stars after that. I headed straight back to the main trail. I had my flashlight out, but I only used it for part of the way. Once I was under the thicker trees, it felt better to walk in the dark, less exposed somehow. About halfway down, I passed a couple coming up. I asked if they'd seen any drones or anything unusual in the sky. They said no, just stars. When I got back to my car, I sat inside for a while before turning the engine on. The compass in the dashboard showed north as due west for about 3 seconds, then corrected itself. I remember that detail because I looked at it, then turned my head toward the actual mountains and thought, that's not right. And then it fixed itself like nothing had happened. The drive home was quiet. I didn't try to play music. Didn't call anyone. I didn't even check the video I'd tried to take until the next morning. It was just static, a 10-second clip of gray fuzz. No audio, no image. Nothing else on my phone had been affected. I haven't done a solo hike up Eldon since. I've gone out with friends, but I don't tell them the real reason I avoid that side of the mountain. It's not that I'm scared, exactly. It's more like I don't want to bring whatever that was back with me. The first time it happened, I figured it was a bird or a raccoon or something. Just one of those motion light false alarms you get living a little outside town. But it kept happening. Not every night, but often enough that I stopped chalking it up to coincidence. I live in central Pennsylvania, a little outside of Mill Hall. Not totally rural, but enough that the houses are spaced out, and most people have yards with trees or a patch of woods behind them. My place backs up to a creek and about 50 yards of open grass that leads into a pine break. The nearest neighbor's house is maybe 100 yards away through the trees. I put in motion lights last fall after a deer smashed into the side of my truck one night. They're just standard LED floods, one by the garage, one at the back door, and one facing the backyard, mounted above the sliding glass door. That back one's the one I'm talking about. This started in late February, still cold at night. I was in the living room watching something around 10 when the floodlight out back snapped on. It's bright, lights up half the yard. I glanced out the window. Nothing there. No animal, no movement. I checked the security app on my phone. Cheap little camera tucked under the light fixture. It records for 30 seconds after motion. I watched the clip twice. The grass swayed a little, but that was from the wind. Nothing obvious. Then I noticed something on the second watch. A darker patch moved across the lawn, just for a second. Not shaped like a person or an animal, more like a ripple, like the shadow of a bird overhead. Except the movement was low and wide and moved left to right, against the direction the wind was blowing. It passed near the middle of the yard, then vanished. It didn't spook me, just made me squint and go, huh, could have been a camera glitch. Low light does weird things, but it happened again the next night. Same time, just after 10. Light snapped on, I checked the camera, same deal. Grass moving in one direction, but this faint, shapeless shadow sweeping in the opposite. It looked almost like someone dragging a blanket across the lawn, only without the actual object, just the impression of movement. I paused it and dragged the slider back and forth. The shape moved fast but smooth, and again, there was nothing in the rest of the footage. No figure, no animal, no sound. Just that same motion trigger. I still didn't think much of it. Just a weird trick of lighting, maybe the IR sensor bugging out. I adjusted the sensitivity on the app and let it go. A few days passed with nothing. Then it started up again, same time window between 10 and 10:30. The fourth time, I stood at the sliding door waiting. The light came on and I stepped out onto the deck. The wind was coming in from the south, rustling the pine trees and blowing toward the house. I stood there a minute, holding my breath. That's when I saw it with my own eyes. A dark sweep moved across the grass, low to the ground, again against the wind. It didn't have a shape exactly. Not a person, not an animal, just a moving absence of light. Like something semi-transparent was gliding across the yard and the light hit it just wrong. It passed from the middle of the yard to the tree line and was gone in about 2 seconds. No sound, no crunch of grass, no footsteps. The air felt normal. Maybe colder for a moment, but that could have just been my imagination. I went back inside and locked the door. That was the first night I felt uneasy. After that, it didn't happen every night. But when it did, it always came around the same time. Never earlier, never much later. I checked the logs. The motion lights would kick on somewhere between 10:08 and 10:25 p.m., record for 30 seconds, then shut off. Each time the same shadow, sometimes faint, sometimes sharper, depending on how clear the night was. But it always moved the same direction, left to right from the perspective of the house toward the woods, always against the wind. I told my friend Brian about it. He's the kind of guy who always blames things on deer or weird lens flares. He came over one night to sit on the deck and see it himself. We waited until 10. I left the lights off at first. It was cold, mid-30s, and Brian joked about needing more beer to justify sitting outside in the dark staring at grass. Then at 10:16, the light snapped on by itself. We both flinched. Brian leaned forward in his chair. I stood up and looked out across the yard. Nothing. Just the wind moving the pine branches. Grass swaying toward us. Then Brian said, "What the hell was that?" I didn't answer. I saw it too. That same ripple, barely there, passed across the lawn from left to right, moving smoothly, no footsteps, no rustling. "Was that a bird?" he asked. "A low bird?" "No," I said. "Dude, that looked like a shadow." It did. He stared at me, then stood up and walked to the edge of the deck. "Where'd it go?" I pointed to the tree line. We stood there for a while. The light shut off on its timer. The yard went dark again, and Brian didn't say much for the rest of the night. Before he left, he asked if I'd tried putting trail cams out back. I said no, but I was thinking about it. The next day, I bought one at the hardware store in town and mounted it on one of the trees facing the house. I set it to record any time it caught movement, day or night. That night, the motion light went off at 10:12. Same deal. No sound, no physical object on camera, just the ripple. I checked the trail cam the next morning. It had nothing. Not a single recording from 10 to 10:30. Like whatever was setting off the motion light wasn't even visible from the opposite angle. I moved the trail cam closer the next night. Still nothing. The backyard camera kept recording the shadow. The trail cam stayed blank. By the end of the week, I stopped bothering. The last time it happened was in early March, March 5th. I was watching TV, waiting for it. I'd started keeping the back porch light off just to see better when the motion light triggered. At 10:23, the backyard lit up. I went straight to the sliding glass door. The wind was light that night, almost still. This time, the shadow didn't move across the yard. It moved toward the house. It didn't have a shape, just a smear of darkness moving faster than before, almost like it was gliding uphill, straight from the trees toward the deck. I stepped back instinctively. The light was harsh, overexposed the yard, but I could still make out the motion. It stopped just before the deck stairs. Just stopped, like it hit a boundary. Then the light shut off. I didn't move for maybe 2 minutes. I was breathing shallow, listening for any noise outside. There was nothing, not even the wind. Eventually, I turned the porch light back on and stayed away from the door. I didn't sleep much that night. I haven't seen the shadow since. The motion light still works fine. Comes on when a squirrel runs by or when I take the trash out. I check the camera every now and then, but since March 5th, nothing strange has shown up. Just those 30-second clips, still saved in the app, over a dozen of them. Same yard, same wind, same shape, moving the wrong way. It was around 3:30 in the morning when I woke up. I didn't shoot up in bed or anything dramatic like that. I just sort of opened my eyes all at once, like my body decided to be awake before my brain did. No dream I could remember. No sound had jolted me. I just wasn't asleep anymore. The room was completely dark. I live alone in a one-story ranch outside of Salina, Kansas. Quiet neighborhood, mostly older folks who don't stay up late. My bedroom faces the back of the house, and I keep blackout curtains pulled tight, so there's no ambient light unless I leave something on. That night, I hadn't. I lay there for a minute trying to get comfortable again. But I had this weird sense that something was off. Not danger exactly. More like that feeling when someone's standing behind you before you turn around and see them. Like my body knew something I didn't. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Upstairs. Except I don't have an upstairs. My house is one level. No attic. No second floor. Nothing above the ceiling except a shallow crawl space with insulation and ductwork. You'd need a ladder to even get up there, and the only access is a panel in the hallway that's never been touched since I moved in 4 years ago. But I heard them. Slow, deliberate steps. Not like an animal skittering or the house settling. Human footsteps. Above my head. They circled the house, starting from somewhere near the living room, passing over the hallway, then the kitchen, then back again. I counted maybe 7 or 8 steps, then a pause, then a few more. It lasted maybe 20 seconds in total, then nothing. Not silence like the sound stopped. Silence like the air itself went still. I didn't move, just lay there, staring at the ceiling in the dark, trying to hear anything else. My heart was thudding, but I kept still. Eventually, I sat up and grabbed my phone off the nightstand. It was 3:41. No notifications, no lights on. I turned on the flashlight and looked around the room. Everything was exactly where it should be. I crept down the hallway, past the bathroom and laundry room. No sound. No light. I checked the panel in the ceiling, still sealed. No scuff marks, no signs of tampering. I even stood on a chair and pressed my hand against it. It didn't move. I went to the living room and stood still for a long time. Nothing. No creaks. No humming. Just dead quiet. The kind where the fridge motor sounds louder than it should. I turned on the back porch light and peeked outside. Yard was empty. Gate still shut. Nothing on the cameras. I've got a small 2-camera setup that records motion. One for the driveway, one for the backyard. Checked both. Nothing triggered after midnight. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Just sat on the couch with a blanket and left a lamp on. Next day, I climbed up into the crawl space with a flashlight. I had to borrow a step ladder from my neighbor Carl to even get up there. There was dust and insulation and not much else. No signs of anything disturbed, no footprints, no animals, no tools or loose boards, nothing that would make noise like that. I figured maybe it was just a weird house noise I hadn't heard before. Maybe I'd dreamed it and didn't realize. I told myself that enough times that I stopped thinking about it, until it happened again. About 3 weeks later. Same time, middle of the night. I woke up out of nowhere, completely alert. This time I didn't move right away, I just listened. And again, the footsteps, above me, same slow pattern. 7 or 8 steps, pause, a few more, then nothing. But this time I noticed something else. The sound didn't travel like footsteps normally would. It didn't echo or vibrate the way it should if someone were walking on wood or drywall. It was muffled, but too defined. Like it wasn't in the crawl space, but just above it. Like something that shouldn't exist was there. After it stopped, I waited again. Same weird silence. Like the house was holding its breath. This time I didn't get up. I stayed in bed, phone in hand, watching the ceiling like it would do something. I think I dozed off after a couple hours. Next morning, I checked the attic again. Same as before. Undisturbed. I've had a couple friends over since then. Haven't mentioned it. It feels dumb to say it out loud. I heard footsteps above my 1-story house. What are they supposed to say to that? But I started noticing other things after that. Little things. The hallway lights flickering just once when I passed by, even though the bulbs are new. My cat Margot, standing in the hallway at night and staring at the ceiling. She's never done that before. Just sits and stares, tail twitching like she's waiting for something. And the worst part? Sometimes I'll wake up, not to sound, but to the silence. That same heavy, unnatural stillness. Like everything is on pause. And I'll wait, frozen, wondering if I'm going to hear the steps again. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But I've never stopped checking the ceiling. The clicking started when I was halfway down the trail, just past the last house where the gravel road turned into dirt. It was late, maybe around 10:30. I'd gotten home from work restless, the kind where sitting still makes your skin feel tight. The weather was warm for early fall, clear sky, no wind. I figured a short walk wouldn't hurt. I'd done it 100 times. Same loop through the trees, out by the old utility easement, then back toward the neighborhood. The first click sounded like someone snapping their tongue once. I stopped walking without really thinking about it, head tilted. Everything else was normal. Crickets, distant traffic, my own breathing. No more clicking. I shrugged it off and kept going. A few steps later, it came back. Soft, quick, not loud. Click, click, click. It didn't sound close enough to be right next to me, but it also didn't feel far away. It was like it existed somewhere just outside where I could point to. I stopped again. Silence. I actually laughed, a short, nervous one, and said out loud, "Okay," like that explained it. I told myself it was an insect or something echoing weird through the trees. Sound does strange things at night. I knew that. I walked again, slower this time. The clicking resumed almost immediately, but now it felt like it was moving. Not following behind me exactly, more like it was shifting around me. One click from the left, then another slightly ahead on the right. Never overlapping, never frantic, just patient. I stopped and looked up into the trees. The sound cut off so cleanly it was unsettling, like someone had flipped a switch. I stood there longer than I meant to, scanning the branches. The moon was bright enough that I could see leaves and empty sky between them. Nothing moved. No birds flushing, no squirrels scrambling. Even the crickets seemed quieter, like they were holding their breath. I told myself I was getting into my head. That happens when you walk alone at night. I checked my phone, 10:41. Still had signal, battery fine. I texted my friend Marcus something dumb like, "Night walks are creepy lol," and shoved the phone back into my pocket. As soon as I took another step, the clicking started again. This time it was closer. I felt it in my chest more than my ears, like a pressure change you notice before you hear thunder. The clicks weren't louder, just heavier. I stopped, looked up, silence. I tried something then. I took one step forward, then froze mid-step. The clicking cut out instantly, like it had been waiting for that exact moment. I didn't like that. I backed up a step instead of moving forward. The clicking came back, almost curious. 2 clicks, then a pause, then one more. My skin prickled. I turned slowly in a circle, trying to pinpoint anything. Movement, shadows that didn't belong. The trail behind me looked normal. The path ahead disappeared into darker trees. Above me was just sky and branches. I started walking faster. The clicking kept pace, not rushing, not falling behind. It circled me, staying just far enough away that I couldn't place it. Every time I glanced up, it stopped. Every single time. The silence after each look was wrong somehow, too empty, like sound itself had been pulled away. My heart was pounding now, but I didn't want to run. Running felt like the wrong move, like it would turn this into something else. I focused on my steps, counted them in my head. 30 steps in, something changed. The clicking stopped, but not the way it had before. It didn't cut off clean, it faded like someone slowly closing a door. At the same time, the air around me felt different, thicker. My ears popped slightly, the way they do when you go up a mountain too fast. For a second, I felt off balance, like the ground had shifted under me by a few inches. I stopped walking again. Above the trees, something moved. It wasn't bright at first, just a faint dimness, like a patch of sky that didn't match the rest. It slid sideways between the clouds, smooth and steady. No blinking, no sound, just motion. As I stared, it brightened slightly, enough that I could tell it wasn't a star or plane. It was too low, too controlled. The clicking didn't come back, but I could feel it then. This low, vibrating sense in my chest, like standing near heavy machinery. I whispered, "What the hell?" without meaning to. The thing above shifted position, not closer, not farther, just adjusted. The pressure in my ears increased for a second, then dropped away. The light vanished. Not like it turned off, more like it slipped behind something that wasn't there. The forest sounds came back all at once. Crickets, leaves, a car horn, far off. I hadn't realized how quiet it had gotten until everything returned. I stood there shaking, staring at the empty sky. Nothing else happened. I didn't wait for it to start again. I turned around and walked back the way I came, fast but controlled, like if I moved too suddenly, I'd break some unspoken rule. I didn't hear the clicking again. I didn't look up. When I reached the gravel road, the street lights felt painfully bright, normal in a way that almost made me dizzy. I checked my phone again, 10:58. I frowned. That didn't make sense. I hadn't been out that long. The loop usually took 20 minutes, maybe 25 if I dragged my feet. I tried to piece it together in my head, but everything after the clicking started felt blurry, like time had folded in on itself. When I got home, my hands were still shaking. I locked the door, checked the windows, then checked them again. I stood in my living room for a long time, listening. No clicking, no hum, just the house settling. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, Marcus texted back asking what I meant about the night walk. I stared at the message for a while before replying something vague. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding like I'd lost it. I went back to the trail a few days later during the afternoon. Same path, same trees. Everything looked normal. I stood where I thought it had happened and listened. Nothing. But sometimes now, when I'm outside at night and everything goes quiet all at once, I get this strong urge not to look up. Like whatever caused the clicking is still there, waiting for me to notice it again. I was driving back from my sister's place just after 10. She lived about 40 minutes out, past the edge of town where the streetlights thinned out and the roads started cutting through farmland. It was late summer, still warm enough that I had the windows cracked, but the sky was overcast and heavy, like it might rain later. No moon, no stars, just dark. I'd taken that road 100 times. 2 lanes, gentle curves, nothing tricky. I was tired but not falling asleep, tired. The radio was on low, some late-night talk show I wasn't really listening to. I remember thinking about how quiet it felt out there, even with the radio on. No other cars in either direction for a while. I came around a bend where the fields opened up on both sides. Corn on the left, an empty stretch on the right where a barn used to be before it burned down years ago. As my headlights swept forward, they caught something ahead of me. Just for a second. A flash of reflection, like light bouncing off metal. It wasn't on the road. It was above it. I instinctively eased off the gas. My first thought was that it was some kind of sign or maybe debris hanging from a wire. But there were no wires there. The reflection had been too clean, too smooth. Not like when you catch a street sign or an animal's eyes. As I slowed, the reflection was gone. I rolled another 20 feet and scanned the road. Nothing. I checked my mirrors, thinking maybe it was something low and close to the car, but there was nothing behind me either. The road ahead looked normal again, just asphalt disappearing into darkness. I told myself it was probably a trick of the light. Headlights do weird things. Still, my heart was beating harder than it should have been. I turned the radio down without really meaning to. A minute later, it happened again. This time, it was clearer. My headlights caught something metallic, suspended maybe 10 or 15 feet above the road. It didn't have a shape I could lock onto. No wings, no edges I could define, just a smooth surface that reflected light like brushed steel. It wasn't glowing on its own, it only showed up when my headlights hit it. I slowed almost to a crawl. As soon as I did, it vanished. Not like it flew away, it just wasn't there anymore. No movement, no blur. 1 second it was reflecting light, the next it was just darkness. I pulled over to the shoulder and put the car in park. I sat there with my hands on the wheel, listening to the engine idle. The fields were dead quiet. No insects, no wind moving the corn. That struck me as odd later, but at the time I was too focused on staring straight ahead, half expecting the thing to reappear. It didn't. After about 30 seconds, I laughed under my breath, more out of nerves than anything. I told myself I was overtired. I checked the clock on the dashboard. It read 10:18. That seemed right. I drove on. The rest of the road felt wrong in a way I can't really explain. The pavement looked the same, but my sense of distance felt off, like the car wasn't moving as fast as it should have been. The radio signal faded into static, so I turned it off completely. The silence felt heavy. I kept glancing at the road ahead, waiting for that reflection. It didn't come back. Eventually, I reached the stretch where a small bridge crosses a drainage canal. There's a reflective marker there, one of those orange diamond signs warning about the curve. When my headlights hit it, I flinched hard, my foot slamming the brake before my brain caught up. I sat there breathing fast, embarrassed at myself. I crossed the bridge and kept going. When I finally reached the first set of streetlights on the edge of town, I felt a wave of relief that surprised me with how strong it was. I hadn't realized how tense I'd been until then. I checked the dashboard clock again out of habit. It said 10:31. That didn't make sense. The drive from the bridge to town was maybe 5 minutes. Even with me slowing down and stopping earlier, I should have been home by then. I tried to reconstruct the timeline in my head, but it felt fuzzy, like trying to remember details of a dream. I got home a few minutes later and parked in the driveway. I sat in the car for a bit before going inside, scrolling through my phone. No missed calls, no texts, nothing unusual. My phone said 10:34. Inside, everything was normal. My cat came to greet me. The house felt the same as always. I locked the door, made a quick sandwich, and tried to shake off the feeling that something was off. I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, I checked the car in daylight. I don't know what I expected to find. Scratches? Maybe. Something stuck to the hood? There was nothing. The car looked exactly the same as it always did. I drove that same road again later that week during the day. Nothing unusual. No signs, no wires, no structures that could explain what I'd seen. I went back again at night a few days later, telling myself I needed to prove to myself it was nothing. It didn't happen again. But sometimes when I drive at night now, I catch myself slowing down when my headlights sweep over open space, half expecting to see that smooth, metallic reflection hanging in midair. I've never seen it since. I don't know what it was. I don't even know if it was really there. I just know my headlights reflected off something that shouldn't have been. I was driving home later than usual because my shift ran long and I missed the last bus. It was close to midnight, maybe a little after. I took the back highway the way I always did, the one that cut through fields and patches of woods before looping back toward town. I'd driven it so many times I barely had to think about it. The night was clear and dry, no rain, no fog. The sky was dark but not completely black, with a thin wash of stars overhead. The road ahead was empty, just my headlights stretching out over the asphalt. The radio was on low, some talk show I wasn't really listening to. I remember feeling tired in that deep, dull way where your body keeps going, but your thoughts lag a second behind. I rolled the window down a bit to keep myself alert. Cool air rushed in, carrying the smell of cut grass and dirt. A mile or two outside of town, the road dipped slightly and curved left. There was a stretch there with no streetlights at all. Normally it was pitch dark except for my headlights and the reflective paint on the road. That was when everything brightened, not like headlights behind me, not like lightning. The road ahead lit up evenly, all at once, as if a soft white light had switched on somewhere above my car. It didn't glare or cast sharp shadows, it just filled the space. The asphalt looked pale, almost chalky. The trees along the sides of the road showed up in detail I couldn't normally see at night. Individual branches, leaves, the texture of the bark. Even the hood of my car looked different, flatter, like it was being lit from straight overhead instead of from the front. I instinctively lifted my foot off the gas. My first thought was that a helicopter had to be overhead. Maybe a search or something. I glanced up through the windshield, squinting. I didn't see anything. No lights, no shape, no sound of rotors. The radio kept playing, uninterrupted. The light held steady for maybe 2 seconds, long enough for me to register that it wasn't moving and wasn't coming from any direction I could identify. Then it faded, not abruptly. It dimmed smoothly like a dimmer switch being turned down. The road returned to the familiar tunnel of my headlights, the trees melting back into shadow. My heart was pounding harder than it should have been. I told myself it was probably someone with a spotlight in a field nearby. Farmers did weird stuff at night sometimes, or maybe a plane with some unusual lighting angle. I pressed the gas and kept going. A few minutes later, I noticed something felt off. The curve in the road straightened out, and I expected to see the old grain silo on the right. It was a local landmark, tall and pale, with a faded logo on the side. You could spot it from a distance, even at night. But the road ahead was empty. No silo. I slowed down, confused, scanning the darkness. The fields looked the same. The fence lines were where they should be. But the silo was behind me. I checked the rearview mirror and saw it shrinking in the distance, already farther back than made sense. I hadn't remembered passing it. I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder, tires crunching loudly in the quiet. I put the car in park and sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel. I tried to replay the last few minutes in my head, leaving the curve, the light, the fading, driving on. There was just nothing. A blank stretch where the silo should have been. I checked the clock on the dashboard. It read 12:47 a.m. That was wrong. I'd glanced at my phone just before getting in the car. It had been 12:38. Even accounting for the drive, I should have been closer to 12:43 or 12:44 at most. I unlocked my phone and checked it. 12:47 a.m., same as the dashboard. I sat there longer than I meant to, listening to the engine idle and the faint buzz of insects in the grass. The night felt unusually still, like it was holding its breath. Eventually, I told myself I was overtired and spooking myself. Memory slips happened. Time felt weird when you were exhausted. I drove the rest of the way home without incident, but I couldn't shake the sense that I had skipped over something important. That night, I slept badly. I kept dreaming of driving through bright, empty spaces where the road went on forever and nothing moved. The next day, I mentioned it to my sister Maya when she called. I tried to keep it casual. Ever zone out so hard you miss something obvious? I asked. All the time, she said. Why? I think I skipped past the silo on County Road without noticing. She laughed. That thing's impossible to miss. I know, I said. That's what freaks me out. She suggested I was just tired and needed a day off. I agreed, even though it didn't really help. I drove that same route again a few nights later, deliberately this time. Same hour, same conditions. Nothing happened. No strange light, no missing time. I passed the silo and made a point of saying it out loud as I went by, like that would anchor it in place. A week went by, then it happened again. This time I was coming home earlier, around 10:30 p.m. The sky was overcast, low clouds reflecting the glow of the town behind me. The road was damp from rain earlier in the evening, though it wasn't raining anymore. I was halfway through the dark stretch when the road brightened. Same light, same even glow. It reflected off the wet asphalt, making it look like polished stone. The trees lit up again, too clearly, too evenly. I slowed almost to a crawl. I rolled the window down all the way and leaned slightly out, looking up. Still nothing. No sound. No wind. The rain-slick road didn't reflect any visible source. This time I felt pressure in my ears, like descending in an airplane. My stomach fluttered unpleasantly. The light faded again. I stayed stopped for a few seconds after it was gone, breathing slowly, trying not to panic. When I started driving again, my hands were shaking. I passed the silo a minute later. I watched it the entire time, unwilling to look away. When I got home, I checked the clock immediately. It was 6 minutes later than I expected. Not as much as the first time, but enough to notice. Over the next month, the light appeared 2 more times, always on that same stretch of road, always brief, always silent. Each time I lost a few minutes, 3 minutes once, 5 another. I never remembered passing the silo when the light showed up. It was like that part of the drive just didn't stick. I tried recording the drive with my phone once, propped on the dashboard. When I checked the video later, the footage jumped slightly during the stretch where the light should have been. Just a small skip, like dropped frames. The timestamps jumped forward by 4 minutes. There was no visible light in the recording. Eventually, I started taking a different route home, even though it added 20 minutes to my commute. I didn't like the feeling that came with that road anymore. It felt watched in a way I couldn't explain. Sometimes, though, when I drive past the turnoff for the old highway, I feel that same dull pressure in my ears. And for just a moment, the sky ahead looks a little brighter than it should. I keep my eyes on the road and don't slow down. The first thing I noticed was the brake lights. I was driving east on Route 22, the stretch that cuts through farmland and low hills before you hit the river towns. It was late but not fully dark yet, that in-between time where the sky still held some color but the road felt empty. I'd left work late, missed dinner, and just wanted to get home. No music on, just the sound of tires and the occasional passing truck. There were maybe a dozen cars ahead of me, spread out, all moving at a steady speed. No congestion, no reason to slow down. Then, all at once, every red light flared. Not gradually, not one after another. Every single car ahead of me hit their brakes at the same moment. I pressed mine too, more out of instinct than understanding. My coffee sloshed in the cup holder. The nose of my car dipped, and I remember thinking there must have been a deer or an accident up ahead, something I couldn't see yet. But there was nothing on the road. We slowed from about 65 down to maybe 30 in a few seconds, all of us still moving, just hesitant. Nobody honked, nobody swerved. It was like the entire line of traffic had the same thought at the same time. I leaned forward in my seat, squinting through the windshield. That's when I saw the light. It wasn't bright, not like headlights or a flare. It was dull, almost matte, like a soft glow without a source. It hovered above the road. It centered over the right lane, maybe 50 yards ahead of the lead car. It didn't cast light on the pavement. The asphalt underneath looked the same. No reflection, no shadows. The light was there for less than a second. just long enough for my brain to register it as something that shouldn't be there. Then it vanished. Not shooting off, not fading, just gone. At the exact same moment, every brake light ahead of me turned off. Traffic sped back up like nothing had happened. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until my chest burned and I let it out. I checked my mirrors. The car behind me was right on my bumper now, like they'd been just as confused as I was. I could see the driver's face in my rear view, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. I looked back at the road. Everything was normal again. The sky looked the same. No aircraft, no streetlights in that stretch. So nothing obvious could have caused a reflection. My hands felt tight on the steering wheel. A mile later, my phone buzzed in the cup holder. I ignored it at first, focusing on the road, but when it buzzed again, I glanced down at the screen at the next straightaway. Text from Dan. "You see that?" Dan worked in the same building as me. He lived a few exits past mine and usually took the same route home. I called him instead of replying. He answered immediately. "Tell me you saw that too." "I think so," I said. My voice sounded thin. Everyone slowed down. There was something above the road. "Yeah," he said quickly. "Yeah, that light, I thought I was losing it." "Why did everyone brake?" I asked. "Did you see anything else?" "No," he said. "That's the thing. I didn't even think. I just hit the brakes. Everyone did." We drove in silence for a few seconds, still on the phone. "Did it look flat to you?" he asked. "Like it wasn't really glowing, just kind of there?" "That's exactly it," I said, past another pause. "You want to grab a beer?" he asked. "I don't really feel like going straight home." I agreed without thinking about it. We pulled into a small bar near the river, the kind with a gravel lot and a flickering neon sign. Inside, the TV was on low, and a handful of people sat scattered at tables. Dan was already there when I walked in. He looked rattled. We didn't even talk much at first. Just ordered drinks and sat there, both of us replaying it in our heads. A couple at the bar was talking about traffic on Route 22. I caught fragments. Everyone just slowed down, thought there was a wreck. "Did you see that light?" I turned slightly in my chair. One of the guys noticed and asked, "You were out there too?" We nodded. He shook his head. "Weirdest thing I've seen in a while." "How long did you see it?" Dan asked. The guy frowned. "Barely at all. Blink and you miss it." That was the same answer everyone gave. No one could describe it exactly. Some said it was round. Some said it was stretched like a smudge. One woman said she didn't see anything but still slammed on her brakes like everyone else. "That's what freaks me out," she said. "Why did I slow down?" I drove home later than I planned. The road was empty by then. I kept expecting to see the light again, but the highway stayed dark and normal. When I got home, my neighbor Rachel was outside smoking on her porch. "You take the long way home?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Did you hear about that thing on the highway?" She nodded slowly. "My sister called me about it, said traffic just reacted." I went inside, locked the door, and stood there longer than necessary, listening to the house settle. That night, I slept badly. I kept waking up with the sense that I'd missed something important. The next morning, local news mentioned a brief, unexplained slowdown due to possible debris or wildlife. No footage, no explanation beyond that. But over the next few days, I started noticing small things. When I drove that stretch of road again, my speedometer dipped for a split second right where it happened, like my foot eased off the gas without me doing it. I tested it the next day, paying close attention. Same thing. My phone's navigation app showed a delay of exactly 40 seconds along that mile, even when traffic was clear. Dan texted me later that week. "You ever feel like something's watching the road?" I stared at that message longer than I should have. A week after the incident, I drove the route again at almost the same time. Dusk. Same soft light in the sky, same quiet. I told myself nothing would happen. As I approached the spot, my radio cut to static for half a second. Just a soft hiss, then back to normal. My heart started racing. Nothing appeared this time. No light, no braking cars. But when I got home, my car's clock was 3 minutes ahead of my phone. I checked it twice, then again the next morning. It stayed that way. Dan stopped taking Route 22 altogether. I still drive it. I don't know why. Maybe part of me wants to see it again, or maybe I just want proof that it was real and not some shared moment of collective misfiring. Every now and then, when traffic ahead of me slows for no reason, my chest tightens. But so far, nothing else has appeared. just the road, the cars, and that brief second where everyone seemed to know something I still can't explain. I was sitting on the back steps with a mug of coffee, watching the horizon because I couldn't sleep. It was too early for sunrise, still an hour at least, but the sky had that faint pre-dawn gray that makes everything look unfinished. The air was cold enough that my breath showed, and the yard smelled like wet dirt and old leaves. That was when the horizon started to glow. At first I thought my eyes were just adjusting, or that maybe the sun was coming up earlier than I realized. The glow wasn't orange or pink like a normal sunrise. It was pale, almost white, spread thin and even, like someone had turned on a dim light behind the hills. It sat low just above the tree line, and it was steady. No flicker, no color. I checked my phone, 4:47 a.m. I stared at the glow and waited for it to change, to warm up or climb higher. It didn't. It just sat there, flat and calm, bright enough that the silhouettes of the trees sharpened against it. The birds didn't react. No early chirping, no sudden movement. Everything stayed quiet in a way that felt deliberate, like the world was holding still. Then the glow moved. It didn't spread or brighten. It lifted, slowly, smoothly, like a curtain being pulled upward. The light peeled away from the horizon and rose into the sky, keeping the same shape, the same brightness, just climbing straight up. The land beneath it dropped back into darkness as it passed, the hills and trees fading into shadow again. I stood up without realizing I was doing it. My coffee spilled down the steps, steam rising from the splash, and I didn't even look at it. The glow kept rising. It didn't cast light on the clouds because there were no clouds. It didn't reflect off anything. It was just there, hovering now, no longer connected to the horizon at all. And then it was gone. Not fading, not dimming, just gone, like someone had switched it off. The sky snapped back to its normal pre-dawn darkness, stars visible again where the glow had been. I stood there with my hands clenched at my sides, waiting for something else to happen. A sound, a feeling, anything. Nothing did. The cold felt sharper after that, like I'd just stepped outside from a warm room, even though I'd been out there the whole time. The quiet felt heavier. I realized my ears were ringing slightly, not the way they do after a sudden change in pressure. I checked my phone again, 4:49 a.m. 2 minutes had passed. It felt longer. I stayed outside until the actual sunrise, which came when it was supposed to. Slow and orange and familiar. By then, my coffee was cold and my hands were numb. I kept replaying the way the light had lifted, straight up, clean and controlled. Later that morning, I mentioned it to my neighbor Ron when he walked his dog past my fence. He squinted at the sky like he might still see something there and said maybe it was a weird reflection from the highway, even though the highway was miles away and below the hills. That night, I sat outside again. I told myself I was just enjoying the quiet. The truth was I was waiting. Nothing happened the first night, or the second. I started to feel stupid, like I'd overreacted to something explainable and rare. Light does weird things sometimes. The atmosphere bends it. The brain fills in gaps. On the fourth morning, I woke up before my alarm, heart already beating fast, like my body knew something was coming. I pulled on a jacket and went outside. The horizon was dark. The stars were sharp and steady. I waited, staring so hard my eyes watered. At 4:46 a.m., the glow appeared again. Same place, same color, same soft, even brightness. It outlined the trees exactly the same way, like it was following a template. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The glow lifted. As it rose, I noticed something I hadn't the first time. The stars behind it weren't disappearing the way they would behind a cloud or fog. They were still there, just slightly distorted, like I was looking at them through thick glass. When the glow detached from the horizon completely, my chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a band around it. I had the sudden, strong feeling of being observed. Not watched in a creepy way, more like noticed, the way you notice an insect on a window before deciding whether it matters. The glow reached a point directly above the hills and stopped. For maybe 2 seconds, it just hung there. Then it vanished again, leaving the sky unchanged, untouched. I didn't stay outside for sunrise that time. I went inside and locked the door, even though I hadn't felt afraid in any normal sense. More unsettled than scared, like something had broken a rule I didn't know existed. I started writing down the times, always between 4:46 and 4:48, Never on the exact same minute, but close. I checked weather reports. No clouds, no storms, no temperature inversions, nothing unusual. On the sixth morning, I drove out toward the hills after it happened, pulling over on a dirt road where I'd have a clear view. The ground was still dark, frost crunching under my boots. I stared at the spot where the glow had been. Nothing lingered, no warmth, no smell. No sign at all. I stood there longer than I should have, watching the sky lighten naturally, feeling foolish and exposed. That night, I dreamed of standing in the yard again, only the glow didn't lift. It stretched instead, thinning until it was a long, narrow strip of light that cut straight up into the sky, disappearing beyond where I could see. I woke up with my heart racing and the sensation that the room was too small. The glow didn't come back after that week. I still wake up early sometimes, especially when I can't sleep. I sit on the steps and watch the horizon, half hoping, half dreading that pale light will return. It hasn't. But every once in a while, when the sky is perfectly clear and the air is cold and still, I get the sense that dawn is about to break too early again. And for a second, before anything actually happens, the darkness feels thinner, like it's waiting to be pulled away. It was around 9:40 at night when I took Max out. He's my dog, half lab, half something else with short legs and a weird hop when he runs. We usually do a last walk around the block before bed. That night was quiet, clear skies, maybe mid-50s. This was early May in northern Georgia, right between the cool spring evenings and the start of muggy summer. We live in a quiet neighborhood just off one of the older roads that runs past the edge of town. Sidewalks, spaced out streetlights, mostly ranch-style homes. Most folks go to bed early, so after 9-8, it gets real still out there. Peaceful, usually. Max was sniffing around like always, tugging toward a patch of ivy near the sidewalk 3 houses down. We were on the side of the street with fewer trees, just a few scattered yards with box hedges and porch lights. We just passed the Thompsons' driveway when Max stopped. Dead stop. His front legs locked and he refused to move forward. I gave the leash a small tug, thinking he caught a smell or maybe saw a squirrel. He didn't budge, didn't growl or bark either, just stood there rigid, staring at a patch of sidewalk like it was occupied. That's when I noticed how cold it was. Not, it's a little chilly kind of cold. It was like walking into a walk-in freezer. But only in that spot. A very specific spot. I held my hand out and took a step back. Warm again. I stepped forward and bam, cold. My arms prickled and not in a breeze kind of way. There was no wind. No sound except Max's leash rattling a little as he stood there, breathing hard. I looked up. Nothing in the sky. No clouds. No jet trails. Street lamp light looked the same as always. Porch lights still glowing yellow up and down the block. I looked back at Max. He hadn't moved. He was staring at a spot roughly 5 feet ahead of us. His ears were up, his whole body tense. But no sound came out of him. That was what got to me. He's a vocal dog, always whining or huffing when he's confused. But he wasn't making a sound. I took a step forward to pull him past the spot. He pulled back hard, not panicked, just completely unwilling. His body said no. It wasn't a tantrum. It was defiance and fear, but really quiet fear, the kind where something's wrong and they're trying not to trigger it. I crouched next to him and held my hand out into the cold patch again. Same thing. A definite wall of cold air, not blowing, not moving, just cold. I held my hand there for maybe 10 seconds. I could feel my fingers numbing, and then I noticed I couldn't see my breath. That didn't make sense. It was colder than it had been all night, colder than it should have been for that time of year, but my breath wasn't visible. I pulled my hand back, took a step back, normal air again. I blew out visible breath. Max hadn't looked away. His gaze was fixed like he was watching something slowly shift in place. I followed his eyes. There was nothing there, nothing at all, just that same section of sidewalk, a few cracks, and the curb ahead. Then I stepped forward one more time, sort of angling past the spot where he was looking, and I swear I felt something. Not physical, not contact. More like presence, like being watched from way too close. Every hair on my neck stood up. I froze in place halfway between steps, unsure if I should call out or bolt. And then Max made a low whining noise. Still wouldn't move. Still staring. I turned around to back away, and my breath came out visible again. The air behind us was normal. I hadn't noticed the transition the first time, but when I turned back around, I could feel it. The difference. Like I had passed through something I hadn't seen. Max finally moved when I tugged the leash lightly and turned around for good. He didn't look away until we were past the Thompsons' yard, and even then he kept glancing back over his shoulder. We cut the walk short and went home. The rest of the way he was skittish, ears back, tail low, which he never does unless there's thunder. Once inside, he went straight to his crate. Didn't even look for water like he usually does after a walk. I stood by the front window for a bit, watching the street. Nothing out of place. Same empty sidewalk, same quiet. But I didn't go out for our night walk the next day, or the day after that. And to this day, Max won't go near that stretch of sidewalk after dark. He tugs across the street or plants his feet and looks at me like, pick another way. And I do, every time.